Hello, I'm Jake, 37 years old. I had an amazing 3-year marriage with Leah, who's 30. We were deeply in love and inseparable, like two peas in a pod. But everything crumbled when I discovered Leah cheated on me. As I write this, my heart is heavy, and I hope sharing my story brings some consolation. A few years ago, at a noisy street festival in our city, fate seemed to play a role. Leah and I kept crossing paths in the crowd. The last time at the festival, we laughed, realizing we'd met at least 6 times that day. Believing in the universe's power to guide us, I saw this as a message from fate. The green-eyed blonde I often saw felt familiar, so I wanted to talk to her. Our communication was easy, and every part of her personality seemed perfect. It dawned on me during the conversation that she recently became a physics professor at our local state college. This was significant because her appearance didn't fit the stereotypical professor image. With her slim build and youthful complexion, it was easy to mistake her for a recent college graduate. Initially, I didn't think about dating Leah, just saw her as a brilliant friend who occasionally intimidated me with her genius. But as we spent more time together, I realized I had fallen deeply in love with her. She valued our communication and grew fond of me. About 2 months after our first meeting, she started sharing a bed with me, seeking comfort and advice when she had issues with her then boyfriend. Over time, our relationship became more closeness. I knew it was wrong, but I allowed it because she assured me she was about to end her relationship with her boyfriend. After a few weeks of our newfound closeness, she broke up with him, explaining it was due to a lack of intellectual compatibility and different personalities. Though her reasons disturbed me, I felt relieved we were now together, unaware I had fallen into a trap. We continued dating for 9 months and eventually got married. I was genuinely and passionately in love with her. We envisioned growing old together. Before the wedding, Leah and I signed a contract to start a family early. I loved children and didn't want to wait until 40 to be a father. I wanted to spend ample time with my children, witnessing their growth and giving them the fatherly love I missed so much. In the beginning, our plan looked perfect, but around a year after the wedding, we faced a heart-wrenching reality. Leah couldn't get pregnant in our 2nd year of marriage, causing even more sadness for me. We explored every option, ran many tests to figure out why Leah couldn't conceive, but surprisingly, all results came back normal. I even had several examinations myself, hoping to find any underlying problems, but each time, I received positive results. Unlike Leah, who stayed completely calm, I couldn't shake a growing unease. My dream of starting a family in our 2nd year didn't happen, and honestly, it weighed heavily on my heart, causing significant anxiety. Traditionally, women are believed to carry the longing for children, but in our case, Leah seemed surprisingly unfazed by our inability to conceive. She always reassured me, saying, "Don't worry, the time will come when we're destined to have a child," and went back to her daily routine easily. Sometimes, I had to avoid mentioning the topic because it made her react, making me feel like I was exaggerating or blaming her for our difficulties. So, I chose not to discuss it further, respecting her point of view. I'm aware that the details I'm about to share are deeply personal, but expressing these thoughts is crucial to complete my story. Despite our inability to have a child, I didn't let this failure cast a shadow on our marriage. On the contrary, I saw it as an opportunity to strengthen our bond and cherish the precious moments with Leah before children entered the picture. Yet over time, I couldn't help but notice changes in her behavior. It started feeling like we were just strangers living under the same roof. I worked at a construction site and often didn't have the chance to personally meet most of my colleagues and clients. Surprisingly, Leah seemed to know a lot about them, their names, appearance, behavior, and attitudes. We got into the habit of sharing the smallest details of our working days. Similarly, I found myself well informed about the students in her courses, their names, appearance, and even the problems they faced. I knew about difficult and wonderful students, all thanks to Leah sharing stories about her students and her working days. But something changed, and you might want to know how it happened. Let me explain. Suddenly, our regular conversations stopped, and I was puzzled. What could have caused such a change? Initially, I thought she was just having a hard day, but bad days turned into weeks, and the weeks gradually turned into months. We found ourselves in a state of prolonged absence, missing the connection we had before. When I tried to start a conversation, Leah either said she was busy or promised we would talk later, which never happened. As if that wasn't enough, our closeness life suffered too. It got to the point where I begged her for even the simplest touch, but no matter how hard I tried, she wouldn't agree. On the contrary, she was offended and ran out of the bedroom. Every time she did that, it felt like a blow to my self-esteem, and my heart was shattered. It was hard not to feel that she was depriving me of my husband's rights, and it seemed like she was deliberately avoiding the possibility of having a child. Despite my deep love for her, I became more patient, trying to downplay the problem. Strangely enough, I continued to believe that eventually she would realize her actions were pushing us apart and would try to fix the situation. But that hope collapsed as she continued to distance herself, and our relationship deteriorated to the point where we became just neighbors, harboring enmity towards each other. Our once lively conversations went through a tough time, and we ended up in a constant state of disagreement. Maybe I should have investigated to understand why she changed suddenly, but blinded by love, I was driven by the sole desire to save our relationship. In desperation, I made a compromised decision to show my willingness to mend things, hoping it would make a difference. In a serious talk with Leah, I told her that having a child or not didn't matter to me anymore. I assured her that we could spend our lives together without it. Surprisingly, this statement seemed to uplift her for a whole week. I noticed slight changes in Leah's behavior as our closeness gradually resumed, even if it felt somewhat forced. I welcomed the temporary relief from the emotional distance, but just as abruptly as it started, a week later, she returned to her cold and distant demeanor. It seemed the warmth and happiness she showed were just a facade, a temporary mask she put on before shedding it off. This constant cycle of fluctuating emotions deeply disappointed me. The impact of these experiences affected all aspects of my life, influencing my performance and even my ability to sleep peacefully. I often hear couples living under the same roof say they can go for days without communicating meaningfully, and I wonder how they manage it in my situation. The lack of communication significantly affected my mental state, while Leah seemed to remain calm. She came home cheerful, cooked her own food, and then immersed herself in books and a laptop for the rest of the evening. When tiredness finally took over, she went to bed without a word. Due to the stark contrast between our experiences, I felt increasingly isolated and abandoned. While my loneliness worsened, Leah seemed to distance herself, drowning in her emotional solitude. As the third anniversary of our acquaintance approached, I decided to change things and dedicate a whole week to celebrate. I bought a special gift and planned to take her to a recently opened upscale restaurant in the city. Eagerly, I made all the necessary preparations, even booking a table for us. Throughout the day, I sent her numerous reminders via text, desperately hoping she wouldn't forget our plans. But the evening came, and she didn't show up. Moreover, she didn't come home at all that evening, leaving me devastated and abandoned. To my horror, Leah explained her absence, saying she fell asleep at a colleague's while working on a joint project. It was the final blow that shattered all my hopes. I reached a breaking point, emotionally drained, mentally exhausted, unable to handle the constant shocks. Despite persistent thoughts about Leah's possible infidelity, I chose to approach the situation with understanding, not acknowledging the possibility that she had withdrawn from our relationship. Nevertheless, this incident became a turning point, forcing me to confront the painful reality that had been lurking in the shadows until now. The mere thought that the woman I loved had entered into an affair with someone else left me completely shattered and devastated. After the events of our anniversary week, I made the challenging decision to seek answers. Overwhelmed by doubts and suspicions, I turned to the internet and enlisted the help of a private detective to uncover all the hidden truths about Leah's actions behind my back. While the investigator discreetly tracked her, I tried to distract myself by re-entering the dating world. On those nights when I knew Leah was completely exhausted and asleep, I sought solace in these new encounters. I considered using her fingerprint to unlock the phone and check its contents. After reading many stories about spouses discovering infidelity through their partner's devices, I decided to investigate. I went into various apps, checked her personal and work email, looked at her social media profiles, and carefully examined the contact list for suspicious names and emoticons. Despite spending several minutes on this thorough investigation, I couldn't find any evidence. The next day, still troubled by uncertainty, I asked her for a laptop under the pretext of needing it for a specific task. She readily handed it over, and I carefully examined its contents, desperately hoping to find signs of betrayal. To my surprise, her digital footprint was as clear as a newly fallen snowflake. There was no hint of her betrayal. Moreover, I felt guilty that in my relentless quest for the truth, I had resorted to the services of a private detective. When the weekend passed, I felt the need to confess my growing paranoia to the detective and express a desire for him to stop the investigation. However, I decided to be patient and postpone the conversation until Monday, knowing Leah spends most of her time at home on weekends. Finally, when Monday arrived, I contacted the detective to ask him to stop the investigation. Before I could say a word, they immediately informed me that they had found convincing facts that, in their opinion, I should see firsthand. The mere thought that this discovery happened just a week after hiring them almost stopped my heart. Overwhelmed with anxiety, I embarked on the longest trip of my life, allowing me to sort through numerous thoughts. When I met with the detective, my worst fears materialized. Leah was indeed attracted to another person. My heart broke when I saw pictures of them in a closeness setting, hand in hand, exploring different places together. Unable to contain my emotions, tears flowed down my face. Admittedly, I have always been a sensitive person, so it was difficult for me to realize that Leah betrayed our relationship. The situation was worsened by the fact that the photos captured their trip to a new restaurant I had ordered to celebrate our anniversary, and she never showed up. Additionally, in the pictures, they were in a passionate embrace in Leah's car, further intensifying my suffering. The private detective's findings revealed even sadder details, including instances when Leah and her new companion stayed overnight in hotels together. As the truth unfolded, it became clear that the project Leah actively participated in was none other than the man she held in her arms. It was a real shock to discover that her lover was much younger, likely around 20 years old. During the investigation, it turned out his name is Ryan. He is in the last year of the physics department, and surprisingly, Leah is his teacher. Hearing his name, a wave of recognition swept over me, and my heart sank to an unimaginable depth. Leah often mentioned Ryan in our conversations, praising his exceptional intelligence and academic achievements. She recognized him as one of the most capable students. I was aware of her admiration for people with unique intelligence, but I couldn't imagine she'd betray our relationship by having an affair with her student. A mix of heartache and anger overwhelmed me, leaving fragments after this revelation. Over the past 3+ years, I made countless sacrifices for Leah, so this betrayal was even harder to comprehend. While working together, I did everything to make Leah's life comfortable. I handled most household chores, cooking, cleaning, and grocery shopping. Leah's only task was laundry on weekends. I did everything else. Financially, we agreed on a 70-30 ratio, with most from me. I firmly believed it was my duty to bear more financial responsibility to support her. This decision aimed to ease her financial situation. I thought it natural to offer support and help to a loved one, just as I did with Leah. The most challenging part in our relationship was the lack of support from my mother. Despite her disapproval, I chose to marry Leah, complicating our relationship. Reflecting on the past, I instructed a private detective to monitor Leah's actions. The provided photographs couldn't satisfy my need for concrete evidence, pushing me to seek more accurate proof. My determination to catch them in the act intensified when I returned home. My wounded heart longed to meet Leah, but I resisted temptation. Silence engulfed me, hiding the depth of my pain. The surge of emotions forced me to leave the walls of our broken love urgently. Fear of succumbing to anger and causing misuse led me to collect a few necessary things in the closet. In this chaotic process, I stumbled upon an object that destroyed all remnants of love in my heart: birth control pills. Their presence extinguished any remaining hope. Confused at first, considering our unsuccessful attempts to conceive, I painfully realized Leah had been secretly taking birth control pills, unknowingly depriving us of starting a family. The truth hit me like an inexorable wave, crushing my hopes. Leah was the reason we couldn't conceive. In that heartbreaking moment, I realized how much she deceived me, letting me suffer and doubt our fertility. Unaware, she intentionally took birth control pills. The weight of this exposure crushed me more than the knowledge of her affair with a young man. Immersed in sadness, I clutched the birth control pills, tears streaming down my face, trying to comprehend her betrayal. Gathering strength, I decided to leave the house without saying a word to Leah, informing her I was going to my mom's and would be back on the weekend. It was a ruse, an elaborate plan to see if she would take the bait. That evening, I sought refuge in a hotel, longing for solace and clarity amidst mental and spiritual turmoil. The next day, my private detective passed on crucial information. Leah and her lover were heading to my house. This was the case I had been waiting for. In the grip of intense emotions, including anger and betrayal, I wished for a dramatic face-off with Leah. Inspired by videos where people courageously confronted their unfaithful partners, I decided to follow suit. To capture this pivotal moment, I hired a videographer to document every detail. Unobtrusively joining the videographer, we arrived at my house shortly after Leah and Ryan. Prepared for the scene, I was emotionally charged to confront them. Instead of immediately starting a fight, I chose to wait until they entered the house. After about 15 minutes, I cautiously entered the house with the videographer. Knowing Leah seldom locked the front door, especially if she assumed I wouldn't be there until the weekend, we silently headed to the bedroom. Soft music in the living room masked our approach. Outside the bedroom door, a mix of emotions churned in my stomach. Anticipation and anger surged, prompting me to take swift action. Without hesitation, I stepped forward and forcefully hit the door, shattering the illusion of secrecy concealing their betrayal. In the midst of the chaos, I directed the videographer to film Ryan behind Leah during act in bed. The sight of their betrayal further fueled my anger. In seconds, they hastily gathered their clothes, resembling a stampede of rats seeking cover. As Leah slowly realized the gravity of the situation, her screams and insults filled the air, directed at me. Unable to contain my rage, I grabbed her by the arm and forcibly dragged her out of the house, leaving her defenseless and vulnerable. Her partner, hastily pulling on his pants, managed to escape before further confrontation. The scene was chaotic, filled with violent emotions. Leah's screams reflected the consequences of the revealed truth, drawing neighbors out of their homes. At the moment of realization, Leah understood the severity of her actions and hurriedly disappeared in her car. Without delay, I took action, sending incriminating photos collected by my private detective and video recordings from the videographer to the college where Leah worked. Inspired by the stories I had heard, I anticipated the likely outcome, and events unfolded exactly as expected. The following week, Leah faced the consequences of her actions. She was fired from her college job. Exposed by the revelations, Leah was expelled from college, eliminating her future prospects. Despite threatening messages, I focused on ending the toxic relationship and initiating the divorce process. All I wanted was to rid myself of her forever. Leah returned to our house to pack, but her whereabouts remained unknown to me. After our meeting, I spent the rest of the week looking for divorce lawyers in our neighborhood, preparing for the upcoming trial. It was evident that dissolving the marriage was the only way to move forward and reclaim my life. After a thorough search, I found a suitable divorce lawyer and immediately scheduled a meeting to discuss next steps. With a firm decision, I proceeded with the divorce process. A few days later, I confronted Leah, handing her the divorce papers, officially ending our union. Her reaction was unexpected. Leah was shocked by my decision to divorce her, responding with laughter instead of facing the reality. She claimed marrying me was a favor, asserting my intellectual inferiority. Though hurt, I hid my inner shock behind a smile, not wanting her to see how deeply her rude statements hurt me. In that moment, I saw a side of Leah that I had never seen before, the true extent of her callousness and lack of remorse. This deeply disturbed me. I was even more outraged that she brazenly belittled me and boasted about how lucky I was in my relationship with her. She boldly predicted I'd soon crawl back and beg her to take me back, claiming I couldn't live a month without her. Instead of signing the divorce papers, she took them from my hands, saying she was giving me time to recover. That's how she left, leaving me alone with mixed emotions from her heartless words and actions. I kept my discovery about birth control pills a secret, expecting Leah to admit her dismissal from work for crossing ethical boundaries. Surprisingly, she stayed silent, focusing on convincing me to return. Months passed with persuasion until Leah reluctantly signed the divorce papers, officially ending our marriage. Little did I know this wasn't the end of our story. In our first meeting to sign the divorce papers, Leah acted strong, as if she considered herself the only significant woman. After the divorce, she changed dramatically, bombarding my phone and social media with messages. I had to block her number and cut off our online connection, but even these measures couldn't stop her. Weeks later, Leah appeared on my doorstep, looking unhappy with a tear-stained face. Seeing me, a flood of emotions overwhelmed Leah, forcing her to fall to her knees in tears. She begged me for forgiveness, promising to change beyond recognition. She shared her difficulties without me, claiming she had nowhere to turn and faced the danger of having her car confiscated. Having lost her job and tarnished her reputation, it was increasingly difficult for her to find work elsewhere. My heart broke when I saw her vulnerable state, and I listened to her plaintive pleas. Despite the pain I caused her, I couldn't ignore her suffering. This challenged my resolve, forcing me to face the complexities of forgiveness and compassion. When I saw Leah standing in front of me, anger flared up again. She squandered all her savings on her young student boyfriend, giving him lavish dinners and dressing him in luxurious clothes. Now she stood before me, penniless and desperate. Instinctively, I slammed the door and cut her out of my life, but she persisted, pushing her way forward. When her first requests failed, she resorted to another card. Taking a deep breath, she admitted she had something to tell. Intrigued but still wary, I reluctantly let her talk. When she started talking, the unpleasant truth came out. She had been taking birth control pills for the entire 2 years we were trying to conceive a child. This revelation shocked me and sparked disbelief, mingled with the lingering rage inside. Leah confessed to using birth control pills because she wasn't ready for motherhood back then. However, she now insisted she was prepared and promised to try her best to conceive if I returned. She painted a future with the happy, united family I'd always dreamed of. Despite my doubts, I let her explain after carefully listening to her request. When she finished, I calmly let her know that I was already aware of the birth control pills, capturing a mix of surprise and awareness on her face. Looking directly into Leah's eyes, I honestly shared my feelings. I explained that considering forgiveness for her infidelity was one thing, but the deeper wound she inflicted was beyond healing. It was the feeling of being made a fool of. I noticed she saw my worry about our relationship and my fervent prayers for a solution when it seemed all other options were exhausted. Throughout, she remained silent, letting me suffer in vain and repeatedly uttering her disparaging phrase. It was unpleasant to realize that I thought we were on the same page, working toward a common goal, but her silence deceived me. Reflecting on the situation, I admitted my guilt in letting doubts creep into my consciousness. I should have been more attentive to changes in her behavior and suspected she knew about our struggle. However, I treated these fears as paranoia. With a heavy heart, I firmly demanded that Leah leave my territory, making it clear that further intrusion would lead to legal consequences. That meeting marked the last time our paths crossed. I've endured mental anguish before, but the level of frustration and devastation this time surpassed anything I've experienced. I had hoped the pain and anger would fade after she finished her career, but it turned out I was still grappling with these emotions. Despite the desire for retribution, nothing could soften the emotional shock that now consumed me. Overcoming the consequences, I realized I had to find the strength because it turned out I had to solve problems alone. 5 years have passed, and I'm happily married. I have a wonderful and loving wife who gave birth to 2 beautiful and intelligent children. My dream of a happy family has come true, and I'm content. Leah entered 2 relationships, both unsuccessful, mostly seen as a toy rather than a wife and mother. Mutual friends informed me that Leah is now working in college, not as a teacher, but responsible for floor cleanliness. In short, she cleans the floors. This smart and beautiful woman chose such a life for herself, and I don't pity her. I'm Alex, a 34-year-old guy. and I've always believed in the importance of relationships. Lisa, my partner, is 32, and we've been together for 7 years. We met during an internship after college, and our connection was legendary among friends. We were the couple others admired for having it all together. Lisa, a vibrant senior marketing executive at a top tech firm, had to go on yearly retreats due to her job, and I never thought much about it. One year, my close friend Mark joined Lisa's company and was excited about his first retreat. Mark and I have been friends since high school, and I trusted him completely. A few days before the retreat, we met for drinks, and he expressed his excitement about being part of the company getaway. We joked about him being my inside man, keeping an eye on Lisa to ensure she didn't have too much fun without me. The retreat lasted 3 days. On the second day, Mark called me hesitantly, saying he saw Lisa spending a lot of time with her boss, Liam. Initially, I dismissed it as work-related, but Mark insisted they seemed too close, often disappearing for hours with a shared secrecy. Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to surprise Lisa at the resort the next day, coordinating with Mark for updates. Approaching the private beach, I found Lisa and Liam sitting close, their hands intertwined, sharing a closeness moment. It hit me hard. I approached them, trying to keep my composure. Lisa's face turned pale, and Liam looked equally shocked. Without causing a scene, I asked Lisa to join me for a walk. The air was thick with tension as we walked in silence. Finally, Lisa spoke, emphasizing that nothing physical had happened, but admitting they had developed deep, emotional connections. The retreat ended, and so did our relationship. The trust was shattered, and although there was no physical infidelity, the emotional betrayal was just as painful. Months passed, Lisa moved out, and we both tried to heal. Our friends were shocked, and Mark felt guilty for sharing the news, but I was grateful. It was better to know the truth than to live in ignorance. As weeks turned into months, the pain lessened, replaced by a numb acceptance. I immersed myself in work and reconnected with old hobbies to fill the void. One evening, while cleaning a shared storage unit, I found a box of Lisa's old journals and letters. Out of curiosity or a need for closure, I decided to take a peek. Flipping through the pages, I discovered entries from our early days together, revealing hints of doubts and insecurities Lisa had never voiced. A specific entry grabbed my attention. It was from a time when Lisa and I briefly broke up in our 3rd year together. Lisa wrote about meeting someone during that period, someone she felt a deep connection with but decided not to pursue due to our reconciliation. The person she mentioned was Liam. The realization hit me strongly. Their connection wasn't recent. It had roots going back years. The emotional bond they shared during the retreat wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was a rekindling of past emotions. I experienced a mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, sadness, and confusion. Was our entire relationship a deception? Did she always have feelings for Liam? Why didn't she mention this before? I reached out to Mark, my pillar of support throughout this ordeal. Over a drink, I shared my discovery. Mark, always the voice of reason, suggested that perhaps Lisa herself hadn't fully understood her feelings for Liam until they reconnected at the retreat. He reminded me that relationships are intricate, and people often grapple with emotions they don't completely understand. But now I'm at a crossroads. Part of me wants to confront Lisa, seeking answers and closure. Another part wonders if it's better to leave the past behind and move forward. But remember, sometimes the past should remain buried. If you seek closure, confronting her might help. But if you're aiming to move on, it might be best to let it go. It's just challenging to decide. Do I dig deeper, risking opening old wounds? Or do I try to find peace with the unknown? What would you do in my shoes? Relationships are never clear-cut. They're a complex mix of emotions, decisions, and moments that shape us. The pain of betrayal, whether emotional or physical, leaves lasting scars that are difficult to heal.
I never thought of myself as someone who had nightmares. For years, I slept peacefully, free from bad dreams. But an event 2 years ago changed that. The nightmares didn't start right away. They came gradually, getting worse as time passed. What unsettled me most was how my mind twisted a real memory into something exaggerated and wrong. Over time, The dreams became less frequent but never fully stopped. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, hearing words I never actually said. It felt like my mind couldn't let go of the past, even though the real event was far less intense than what my dreams portrayed. One night, I woke up again at 2:30 a.m., drenched in sweat. My wife slept peacefully beside me, thankfully undisturbed. This time, I hadn't cried out in my sleep. I couldn't figure out what triggered the dreams, but they always followed the same pattern, a distorted memory from 2 years ago. In the dream, I was sitting at my office desk with a half-empty scotch bottle, an untouched glass, and a loaded revolver in front of me. I'd down the liquor without feeling its burn, then check the revolver to make sure all 6 chambers were loaded. I'd mutter something like, "I'll destroy them all, but I'll end up in jail." The words varied, but the feeling of anger and self-destruction never changed. Thankfully, the nightmares happened less often, at first weekly, sometimes twice a week, but now less than once every 2 months. The dreams felt real, yet had little to do with the actual event. There was scotch, but I was on the couch, not at my desk, and I don't even own a weapon. I never threatened to destroy anything that night. I just got very drunk and passed out on the couch. To understand it all, I need to go back 2 years. 2002 was a rough year. It started with my wife, Kathy, and I battling city inspectors over our house plans. They rejected our permit until our engineer signed off, confirming everything was up to code. Once we got the permit, we fought with the contractor over deadlines until we finally moved in by August. On top of that, Kathy and I were both swamped with work. I'm Fred Alpinas, and on March 6, 2002, Kathy and I celebrated 6 years of marriage. Despite the house issues, life was going well. I had been with the Independent Investigations Corporation, IOIC, in Indianapolis for 8 years. We're not your typical private investigators. We work for large insurance companies, investigating fraud, recovering stolen property, and minimizing losses. We get paid a percentage of what we recover or save. As a lead investigator, I can pick my cases and delegate to others. It's a profitable business. I was 30 at the time, just starting to find gray hairs in my thick brown hair. I'm confident, whatever that means, and while I'm not movie star handsome, I'm not unattractive. I have a slightly crooked nose from a college boxing match and dark brown eyes. I'm 6'2", 185 pounds, and in good shape, with an athletic build. Kathy, at 29, was the most beautiful woman I knew. She stood 5'8", with dark brown hair streaked with red that fell in long curls. Her blue eyes had flecks of green. She'd been heading the accounting department at DC&H for 2 years, managing 20 accountants. Her company was doing well, and she'd received nice bonuses recently. In early 2002, DC&H had some issues at their Indianapolis office. The manager was fired in February, and Greg Bartlett took over. Greg was around 5'5", a bit overweight and nearly bald with a ring of hair around his head. Kathy thought he was a good manager, and I liked him when we met. At the same time, the company relocated one of its vice presidents, Jack Hansen, to Indianapolis. Kathy mentioned the company was spreading out its VPs to help close big deals in various cities. Jack Hansen, who moved from New York, was about 45, 5'10", and in great shape. He was friendly, but I noticed he had a wandering eye. He was married, but it didn't seem to slow him down. I'd met men like him before, and I didn't like them. Kathy, however, thought he was fantastic, and so did everyone at DC&H. She often talked about his great ideas for business, which meant more money for her. By summer, things had settled down at DC&H, and our house was nearly finished. We moved in during the second week of August and loved it. On move-in day, I joked with Kathy about making love in every room. She looked at all the unpacked boxes, took my hand, and said, "Let's get the kitchen out of the way right now." We did, but with all the work, we never got to the other rooms. Still, we stayed connected, mostly in our bedroom at night. One evening, I brought up starting a family, as we had discussed before. I suggested Kathy stop taking birth control so we could have a summer baby. She hesitated, saying Jack Hansen suggested waiting until next year since she was in line for a promotion. I was surprised she was discussing our personal plans with him, and annoyed she was now calling him Jack. She explained it was just office talk, but I wasn't thrilled with the delay. Still, I agreed to wait until January. By year's end, both of us were busy with work and spent less time together. We tried to make weekends special, but work often intruded. DC&H was in the middle of a major merger, and Kathy's department was swamped. I also had several investigations to wrap up before the year ended. On the last weekend of November, Kathy and I finally got some time off together and went Christmas shopping. Over dinner, she told me the merger with National Pharmaceutical would be finalized by December 20th, and she'd be getting her promotion. I was excited and suggested we start working on having a baby. Kathy, however, wanted to wait a few more months to settle into her new role before taking maternity leave. She made me promise not to tell anyone about the merger, as it could ruin the deal. I reassured her I wouldn't, and even joked about buying stock in National Pharmaceutical. She quickly warned me that would be insider trading and could land us in jail. I assured her I was just joking, and she relaxed. She was nervous, knowing how close the deal was, and didn't want anything to go wrong. December was filled with holiday parties, including ours at IIC on Friday, December 6th. It was a modest event with 43 people, employees, spouses, and partners. We had drinks, appetizers, dinner, and then some music and dancing. The party was low-key, probably because most of us are investigators who work in the field and don't know each other well. I have one close friend at IIC, Bill Ripley, and we sat with him and his wife, Susan. It was a good time, though not wild. We stayed until midnight and then headed home. Once there, I reminded Kathy of our joke about making love in every room of the house when we first moved in. Kathy smiled and teased, "Maybe we can check another room off the list tonight." We talked about starting a family while lying in bed. Kathy suggested we have 2 kids, 2 years apart, and planned to stop birth control in February, hoping to conceive by November. I agreed, feeling relieved that we finally had a plan. However, things started going downhill. On Saturday, after returning from work, I found Kathy staring out the window, distant. She barely reacted when I spoke to her. Sensing something was wrong, I waited until after dinner to ask gently, "What's bothering you, Katie?" She finally admitted, "There's a problem with the deal with National Pharmaceutical. The president, Mr. Benson, is making unrealistic demands. If we don't meet them, we could lose the deal, and I could lose my job." I tried to reassure her, saying, "It won't ruin everything. We have each other." "You don't understand," she replied, her voice tense. "If the deal falls through, it's because of me. I can't explain more, but I haven't done anything wrong." I was confused, but didn't press further. The conversation ended there. The next day, Kathy was even more distant, barely speaking to me. On Monday, she left for work early, saying she had important meetings. That morning, I cleaned the house and took out the trash. Something fell from the bathroom trash can, but after a brief search, I couldn't find it. That evening, Kathy's mood hadn't improved. I asked, "Has work gotten any better?" She replied sharply, "I can't talk about it. I'm under pressure, but I'll handle it." By Wednesday, Kathy seemed to be coming out of her funk. When I got home, she greeted me with a kiss and told me she loved me for the first time in days. Although she was more affectionate, I could tell she wasn't fully back to her usual self, still preoccupied and without her usual smile. "Can you talk about it now, or is it still off limits?" I asked, jokingly. "I probably shouldn't, but it looks like we found a way to satisfy Mr. Benson," she said with some relief. "Jack thinks things will work out." She sounded more hopeful, but still tense. When I asked if she was relieved or determined, she just sighed. "Hopefully, it'll be over soon." It always bothered me when she referred to Hanson as Jack. She said it was because the office was informal, but she still called her boss Mr. Bartlett. That night, Kathy wanted me to hold her, but we didn't make love. I could feel the tension in both of us. After tossing and turning for 20 minutes, I got up and went to the kitchen for a drink. Kathy's briefcase was on a chair, and I felt compelled to take a look inside. I found her day planner and saw meetings with Mr. Bartlett, Hanson, and Mr. Benson. It seemed odd for Kathy to be meeting with a client since she worked in accounting, not sales. Maybe her promotion was leading to something bigger. There was one strange thing in her calendar. Starting on December 6th, she had written started and numbered the days from 1 to 14, with December 20th circled and underlined. I couldn't figure out why she was counting those days. Over the next few days, Kathy's mood improved, but she remained a bit distant. I pieced together that December 20th was important, likely related to the deal with Mr. Benson. That Friday, December 13th, I closed one of my cases and met Bill Ripley for a beer to celebrate. I told him about the numbers in Kathy's planner, though I didn't say it was hers. Bill was just as puzzled as I was. "Maybe you should ask Mary Farrell for a woman's perspective," he suggested. Mary was a top investigator at IIC, so it seemed like good advice. We had a few more beers talking about life and work. I told Bill about my dream of opening my own detective agency one day. He laughed and said, "Let me know if you do. I'll work for you, but you'll have to pay me more than IIC does." "Sure," I joked. "You're already overpaid." We finished our beers, chatted a bit more, and I headed home, feeling disappointed again. Kathy was loving and attentive, but we still hadn't had sex all weekend. What bothered me most was the emotional distance between us. By Monday, I told Kathy I'd likely have to work late every night that week to finish my 2 cases. "You can't work late on Friday," she said. "We need to be at the party by 8:30, so be home by 7 o'clock to get ready." "Okay, I'll be home by 7, I promised. My frustration grew as the week went on. I closed 1 case on Tuesday and we went out to dinner to celebrate, but Kathy wasn't feeling well afterwards, so nothing happened between us. By Wednesday, she brushed me off again. I tried to be patient, knowing she was stressed at work, but I was losing patience. I hoped everything would be resolved after Friday, once Kathy learned whether she was getting her promotion. By Thursday, I was close to finishing my last case. I had one chance to solve it quickly on Friday morning, but if things didn't go smoothly, I might not make it home by 7 o'clock. At dinner that night, I warned Kathy it could be tough to get home in time. "You promised," she said, frustrated. "You need to be home for the party." "I'll try my best," I replied. "If I can't make it, go ahead without me and I'll meet you there." She didn't argue further, but the tension lingered. Friday morning, I caught a break in my case involving stolen jewelry worth over $1 million. The thief had offered to sell it back for $250,000, and the insurance company agreed, saving $750,000. I had to handle the exchange. It took time to arrange the meeting and collect the money from the insurance company. By early afternoon, I had the cash and was ready to meet the thief. I followed the thief to an old parking garage on the west side of town. From across the street, I watched him open the trunk of an old car but take nothing out. He closed the trunk, looked around to ensure no one was following, and left without noticing me. Once he was gone, I crossed the street, picked the padlock, and got inside. I opened the car's trunk and found a small canvas bag containing all the stolen jewelry. I left a note on the broken lock that read, "Better luck next time," and headed back to the office. I called the insurance company to report the recovery and arranged for the jewelry to be picked up. It was a good day. I stopped the thief from profiting, saved the insurance company money, and secured a solid fee for my firm. As I was leaving the office, I saw Mary Farrell talking to another investigator. After she finished, I invited her to lunch. "Are you buying?" she asked with a smile. "I'll pay if you help me with something," I said. "Deal," she replied. We grabbed sandwiches and sodas at a nearby shop. While we ate, I explained what I'd found in a day planner. The word "started," written on December 6th, followed by numbers up to 14, with the 20th circled and underlined. Mary thought for a moment, then smiled. "It's a cycle," she said. "The person started their period on the 6th and counted 14 days. The 20th is circled because it's the most fertile day." I was stunned. It had never occurred to me. "Does that help your case?" she asked, still smiling. "I'm not sure," I said, my mind racing. "But it might." I thanked Mary for her insight, still processing what she had told me. Back at the office, I spent the rest of the day on paperwork, distracted by thoughts of why Kathy would be tracking her cycle. It didn't make sense, especially since she wasn't planning to stop birth control until February. A nagging thought crossed my mind. Was she tracking it for someone else? That unsettling idea stuck with me. I felt like I was missing pieces of the puzzle, and my gut told me something was wrong, but I knew I needed to be patient and not jump to conclusions. By 5 o'clock, I finished my work and headed home. I felt a mix of anticipation, having solved a big case and gotten some answers about Kathy's day planner. I hoped the evening's party would help ease her stress. When I got home around 5:30, I saw a light on inside. As I unlocked the door, I glimpsed movement at the top of the stairs. Kathy was coming down, completely unclothed, holding a towel and shaving cream. I froze, confused. She walked into the living room, and suddenly everything felt different. Without thinking, I hurried back to my car, needing a moment to collect myself. After pulling into the garage, I gave Kathy time to realize I was home and get dressed. When I entered the house, I thought I heard a door close upstairs. "Katie, I'm home," I called out. She responded from the bathroom. "You're home early. That's great. I'm getting ready. Why don't you use the guest shower?" "Why?" I asked, puzzled by the unusual suggestion. "I'm busy here," she replied quickly. Something felt off, but I couldn't decide if it was a game or something else entirely. At 7:30, Kathy was ready, looking composed and smiling slightly. "You look great," I said. "You're going to turn some heads tonight." "Yours, I hope," she replied, her tone unreadable. We drove to the party in silence for a while. Finally, Kathy broke the tension with a quiet apology. "I'm sorry, Fred. It seemed like a good idea at the time." After a pause, I replied, "No problem. We'll talk about it this weekend. Let's just enjoy tonight." The party was at the DC&H office in a large auditorium on the second floor. As soon as we arrived and checked our coats, Hanson appeared, pulling Kathy aside. I watched them closely, feeling my tension rise. They spoke quietly. Kathy nodded a few times, then shook her head. Hanson looked frustrated, but eventually smiled. He seemed to offer her something, and although she didn't seem thrilled, she agreed before he walked away. When Kathy returned, I asked, "What did Hanson want?" "The deal with National Pharmaceutical closes at 10 o'clock tonight. I have to meet with Jack and Mr. Bartlett. If it goes well, we'll get the contract." "And your promotion?" I asked. "Yes, if all goes well," she said without enthusiasm. "Then we can start trying for a baby?" I asked, hoping for excitement. "Yes, we can start our family," she said, but her tone was flat. I wanted to push her for the truth, but deep down, I felt I already knew what was going on. As we entered the party, Kathy looped her arm through mine, acting affectionate. The room was beautifully decorated with tables, a band playing at one end, and a buffet and open bar at the other. I scanned the crowd, not knowing many people, but quickly spotting a man standing alone at the bar. He stood out, a tall man in a dark blue Armani suit. "Who's that by the bar?" I asked Kathy. "I don't know," she replied, though her body language said otherwise. "Let's get a drink," I suggested. "You go ahead. I need to say hello to some people from my department," she said. I went to the bar, got Kathy a glass of red wine, and grabbed a beer for myself. I then approached the man in the Armani suit. "Mr. Benson, how are you?" I asked casually. He looked surprised. "How do you know me?" "It's my job to know things," I replied. "I'll bring this wine to Miss Alpin, but I'd like to come back and talk if you don't mind." Benson, looking uneasy, studied me for a moment before saying, "Sure, I'll be here." I handed Kathy her drink while she chatted with colleagues. "I'll walk around while you talk," I said. "Don't go far," she replied with a tense smile. "I need you by my side tonight." "I won't be long," I assured her, sensing her unease. I returned to Benson at the bar. "I'm Fred, security at DC&H, just making sure everything runs smoothly tonight." Benson grew more uneasy. "That's what Jack told me," he muttered. "Just waiting for the fun to begin." "You seem to know everything," he said nervously. "It's my job," I replied with a smirk. "You like brunettes?" "I love brunettes, especially with long hair," he grinned. "Like Miss Alpin?" I asked directly. "Exactly," he said with a bolder smile. I wanted to punch him but held back. "I bet you like them bald too?" I added, pushing further. "Bald is good," he laughed. I'd heard enough. "I need to go check on things. If you need me, I'll be around," I said, walking away, muttering curses under my breath. Back at the hall, the band started, and a man asked Kathy to dance. She politely declined, then pulled me onto the dance floor. As we danced, I kept an eye on Benson, making sure he didn't realize I was Kathy's husband. I was still working out my next move, and it was already 9:30, the tension gnawing at me. When a slow song started, Kathy held me unusually tight, almost uncomfortably so. I noticed Benson watching, seeming tense. I smiled and gave him a thumbs up, trying to dismiss him. After the dance, we returned to our table. Just then, Greg Bartlett approached with a small package, whispered something to Kathy, handed it to her, and walked away. Kathy hid the package behind her back and leaned over to me. "I need to go to the bathroom," she said. I sensed something was off. "Don't do this," I told her. "Don't do what?" she asked. I grabbed her hand, looking into her eyes. "You know what I'm talking about. I'm not stupid. Stop this now." "I don't know what you mean," she insisted. "I just need to go to the bathroom." Kathy pulled her hand away and walked off without looking back. While she was gone, I started piecing everything together. The real trouble began when she first started calling Hanson Jack, which bothered me. Then came her sudden depression and the news that the deal with National Pharmaceutical was at risk, with Kathy fearing she'd be blamed despite doing nothing wrong. All those meetings with Bartlett, Hanson, and the client followed. Kathy seemed to be tracking her, or someone else's, cycle, and that night was marked as a fertile one, even though she was still on the pill. Then we argued about her shaving. She never explained why, and I didn't tell her what I saw earlier. Hanson kissing her stomach as I stood on the porch. My world felt like it was falling apart. I couldn't face her while she was with him. So I opened the garage door, giving them a chance to stop whatever was happening. When I finally went inside, I saw Hanson rushing across the street to his car. It seemed Benson saw Kathy and decided he needed her, influencing Hanson. I didn't waste time figuring out why, just knew I had to stop it. Bartlett and Hanson were deeply involved, and I wanted to ruin their plans. By 9:45, Kathy hadn't returned from the restroom and time was running out. I decided to find her, take her home, and deal with the fallout later. As I headed for the door, the band announced a break and an idea struck me. I noticed Benson, Bartlett, and Hanson together at the bar, the perfect audience. I approached the lead singer and asked, "Can you keep your mic on? I need to make an announcement." "Sure, no problem," he said, handing me the wireless mic. "It's ready, just flip the switch." I took a moment to gather my thoughts, then turned on the microphone. "May I have your attention, please?" I said, but the room was still noisy. "May I have your attention, please?" I repeated, and slowly the room quieted down, with most guests now looking my way. I saw Katie coming back from the restroom. Then I glanced at the trio of idiots, Benson, Bartlett, and Hanson. All three were staring at me with curious looks on their faces. "Can I get everyone's attention?" The room fell silent. Kathy stood in the doorway and looked at me. "Thank you. I just want to take a few minutes to speak to you all about this special occasion. First, what a great party this is. Let's give a round of applause to those who put it together." Most of the room started clapping, and Kathy began walking slowly toward me, looking scared. "I've had a few drinks and I'm feeling pretty good, so hopefully I can get the words out right. I wanted to share some things about me and my wonderful wife, Kathy." I glanced at Kathy and smiled, then looked at the three idiots by the bar. I couldn't tell what they were thinking, but they didn't look happy. "First, some good news. Katie and I are expecting a baby." Many of the guests clapped. Katie covered her face with her hands, as if mildly embarrassed to anyone who didn't know the real story. Hanson looked mad. Bartlett looked confused, but I couldn't read Benson. "There's more good news. Kathy told me she's getting a promotion tonight for her work on the national pharmaceutical deal. Apparently, Kathy, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Hanson, and Mr. Benson will be meeting upstairs tonight to sign the contract. Isn't that great?" More applause. "Oh God, please stop," I heard Kathy say. She stopped about 10 feet away from me and slowly sank to the floor. The idiots, numbers 1 and 2, were furious. Benson looked almost amused. "The night started out so strangely that I thought I'd share it with you. When I got home from work, I found my lovely wife in the bathroom about to shave." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but most sat stunned. "We had a little argument about it. She said it was meant to be a surprise and I told her not to do it. I thought I won that argument, but now I realize she wasn't doing it for me. She was doing it for Jack." At that, there was an audible gasp. Katie was lying on the floor crying, and most of the guests were looking at me like they were witnessing a train wreck. Only 2 idiots remained now. Benson had disappeared. Hanson was bright red and shaking. Bartlett started walking toward me like he could stop me. "Katie did it because she was supposed to be Mr. Benson's gift tonight. It seems your company's management thinks it's good business to encourage employees to sleep with clients to get contracts, even if it ruins their marriages." Bartlett was now right in front of me, trying to grab the mic. I snatched it from him and turned it off. "Listen, idiot, try to take my mic again, and I'll toss you like a sack of rocks. Actually, I'll do it anyway." Bartlett backed off and exchanged a look with Hanson. I turned the mic back on. "One last thing for Bartlett and Hanson. I'm suing this company for what you did to my marriage, and I'm sure I'll be compensated. Part of the deal will be that you 2 idiots, and everyone else involved, get fired. Good night, everyone, and enjoy your vacation." The room was dead silent as I put the mic down and walked over to Katie, who was still on the floor. I squatted down next to her. "Katie." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Fred, I'm so—" "Katie, don't say anything," I interrupted. "Think you'll still get that promotion?" I stood up and looked around. People were staring, but when I looked back at them, they quickly turned away. I took one last look at Katie and walked out, grabbing my coat. I was heading toward the door when Hanson stepped in front of me. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "I entertained you before you, DC, and H could finish entertaining my wife, and I hope I just cost you millions. I'd hate to think we all went through that for a few $100,000. "You'll pay for this," Hanson said. Actually, I think you're the one who's going to pay, I replied. Along with the lawsuit, I'll be talking to the SEC. I'm sure they'll be interested in your company's business practices. I turned to leave, and Hanson grabbed my arm. Wait, I'm not done with you, he said. I brushed his hand off. Touch me again and you won't walk out of here tonight, I said. I heard him cursing under his breath as I walked away. When I got home, I went straight to the liquor cabinet, grabbed a bottle of scotch, and started drinking myself to sleep. I think that's when the nightmares began. I was on my second drink when I noticed something blue in one of the large pots on the kitchen floor. I got up to see what it was. It was a blue plastic case hidden under the plant. I knew what it was as soon as I picked it up. When I opened it, my suspicions were confirmed. I remembered something falling out of the bathroom trash can on Monday morning. I searched the kitchen, but never thought to check the flower pot. I walked back to the couch and set the case on the coffee table beside the scotch. I poured another glass and took a large sip. Then I picked up the case again and opened it. Staring at it, I thought, it's pretty damn full. Nothing's missing. I put it back down and poured myself another drink. I'm not sure how long I lasted, but by 9 o'clock Saturday morning, I woke up on the couch in the family room. The bottle of scotch was nearly empty. My head was pounding and my mouth tasted awful. I stood up, feeling dizzy for a moment, and my stomach churned. I started the coffee maker and headed to the shower. Upstairs, I noticed Katie still hadn't come home, and I didn't expect her to. Either she was scared to face me, or she was pissed that I'd ruined things at DC and H. I wasn't sure I cared. The shower helped, and I felt a bit better. After 2 cups of coffee, scrambled eggs, and toast, I sat back down on the couch in the family room, trying to think through my next move. My heart ached, thinking about how much I loved Kathy. How could she do this to us? I couldn't believe her ambition had driven her to sleep with a client just to secure a deal. I doubted I could ever forgive her for this, but I knew I had to give her a chance to explain herself if she wanted to. I wasn't going to chase her down for an explanation. If she didn't feel the need to justify her actions to me, I didn't need to know why. The reasons would only matter if she wanted a second chance. All I could do was wait and see if Kathy would reach out to me. I started wondering where she spent the night and remembered how she looked when I left the party. Guilt washed over me for leaving her on the floor. I should have taken her home. I wasn't proud of myself, but I was hurt, angry, and had no sympathy for Katie. The more I thought about it, the worse I felt, and the more I wondered where she was. At 11 o'clock, I was still on the couch when the phone rang. I assumed it was Kathy and debated whether to answer. I picked up on the 6th ring. Mr. Alpin? Yes? This is Special Agent Mark Walker with the FBI, said the voice on the line. Is your wife with you? No, my wife isn't home, I said, wondering why the FBI wanted to talk to Kathy. No problem. You're the one I need to speak with, Agent Walker said. Me? I asked. About what? I'd rather discuss it in person, he replied. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I think so, I said. Where are you located? Agent Walker gave me directions to his office, and I agreed to meet him at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. After the call, I tried to figure out what the FBI wanted with me. The best guess I had was that it must be about one of the cases I'd recently worked on. But if that was it, why couldn't he just tell me over the phone? Over the years, I'd spoken with law enforcement plenty of times regarding cases I'd handled, and it never bothered me. But something about this FBI invitation made me uneasy. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I put on jeans and a sweater and headed downtown to meet Agent Walker. I parked in a lot across the street from the high-rise office building that housed the FBI offices in downtown Indianapolis. I took the elevator to the 7th floor and gave my name to the receptionist. I'm here to see Special Agent Walker, I said. Please have a seat. I'll let him know you're here, she replied. I waited only 2 minutes before he appeared in the lobby. Unlike the expensive Armani suit he wore the night before, Special Agent Walker was dressed casually in blue Dockers and a white Oxford shirt, no tie. Mr. Alpin, thank you for coming, he said. Please, follow me. I followed him into a conference room, and after sitting down, Agent Walker offered me a cup of coffee, which I accepted. He poured 2 cups from a coffee maker in the corner and handed one to me. After taking a sip, he sat down across from me. Should I call you Special Agent Walker or Mr. Benson? I asked. Why don't you just call me Mark? He said. And may I call you Fred? Fred is fine, I said. You must be pretty confused right now, Mark said. I am, but I think I'm starting to understand, I replied. You were working undercover as Mr. Benson, right? That's correct. I'm counting on your discretion to keep what I'm about to tell you confidential, he said. You don't need to worry. I'm an investigator myself and understand confidentiality, I said. But I'm still not sure whether you're a friend or foe. I hope you can explain how my wife got mixed up in all this. I'll tell you everything I can, and I'll answer your questions, as long as they don't compromise our investigation. Fair enough, I said. Earlier this year, the Securities and Exchange Commission reached out to the FBI, he began. They received troubling information about DC&H's business practices from someone inside the company and asked us to investigate. After following up on the information provided by the SEC, we found enough evidence to warrant a deeper investigation. I can't give you too many details, but we decided that an undercover operation was necessary. Mark stood up and began pacing as he spoke. During our investigation, we discovered that DC&H was trying to interest National Pharmaceutical in a merger, Mark explained. Mr. Benson had voiced concerns about DC&H's tactics to one of our agents. We later found out that no one from DC&H had actually met with Mr. Benson. With his cooperation, I assumed his identity and started negotiating with DC&H. I managed to convince Hansen and Bartlett that I was Benson, and I made them think I was interested in their merger proposal and ready to sign. But once they started getting excited about the millions they thought they'd earn, I acted hesitant. I told them I wanted to talk to other firms before committing, just to see what they'd do to get me to sign. So did you ask about my wife? I interrupted. Not exactly. On my first visits to DC&H's office, I was introduced to your wife when I was escorted into the conference room to meet Bartlett and Hansen. I mentioned to Hansen that I'd like to speak with Mrs. Alpin. Why? I asked, trying to keep calm. Hansen responded by saying, "She's very attractive, isn't she?" I agreed, but that wasn't the reason I asked to see her. Then why did you want to see her? I told Hansen that since she was head of accounting, I wanted to discuss the company's financials, considering I was supposedly planning to merge. The truth is, your wife was the whistleblower who went to the SEC, raising concerns about how DC&H was operating. So, Kathy knew you were working undercover for the FBI? I asked, now more confused. No, she didn't know, Mark said. The information she provided to the SEC implicated people higher up than Bartlett and Hansen. She named the president and CEO. I couldn't be sure if I could trust her. My assignment was to investigate Bartlett and Hansen, and I couldn't risk her blowing my cover to protect them. So, Katie was the one who reported the company execs. I wasn't sure what that meant for me. If she didn't know Benson was a fake, was she really going to go through with it? I thought to myself. I had questions for Mark at the party, but I decided to wait and see if his story answered them. As I mentioned, I made it clear to Hansen that I might walk away from the deal. So he asked what it would take to make me sign with DC&H. I asked him what he could offer. That's when Hansen said, "I noticed you think Kathy Alpin is quite beautiful. How'd you like a piece of her?" I was stunned. I expected a bribe, not that. I needed to see how far this would go, so I told him I might be interested but didn't commit. I felt the bile rise in my throat as I listened. This next part might be hard for you to hear, but it's crucial to the story, Mark said cautiously. You can't tell me anything worse than what I've already been through, I replied bitterly. All right then, he continued. A few days later, I met with Hansen again. He asked if I'd thought about his offer. I asked if he meant arranging for me to sleep with your wife, and he confirmed it. I didn't want to seem too eager, so I said I was interested, but still unsure she was worth it. Hansen assured me that she was. I still didn't see how he could deliver on such a promise, so I asked how he planned to get a married woman to agree to that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Let me worry about that, Hansen told me. If you want her, she's yours. That was all he said. That son of a witch, I muttered under my breath. Who the hell does he think he is? He's just a nasty fool. Mark nodded, acknowledging my anger. I got the sense he wanted me to take the offer not just to get me to sign, but for some other twisted reason. I let him talk for a while, then I asked when he could arrange for me to meet your wife. Without hesitation, he said it would happen at the company Christmas party on the 20th. So, were you going to go through with it? I asked. Were you just going to sleep with my wife for the sake of your investigation? No, I had no intention of sleeping with your wife, Mark said firmly. First, it would have been unethical, and second, I was pretty sure the room where I was supposed to meet your wife would be wired with hidden cameras and microphones to record everything. It wasn't just meant to get me to sign the deal, it was also set up for blackmail. How did you plan to get out of it? I asked. I was going to back out at the last minute, saying the situation wasn't right. Then I'd suggest making the deal if Mrs. Alpin met me in a hotel room after the party. Once she was alone, I was going to reveal my identity and bring her in for questioning. We had planned to arrest Bartlett and Hansen today, and we believed we'd have enough evidence to charge them both this morning. I was quiet for a moment, taking it all in. You came up to me last night, introduced yourself, and said you were from security. The thing is, I already knew who you were, and I was scared you knew what was happening and were in on it. I wasn't sure whose side you were on until you gave your speech. Oh man, I said, rubbing my temples. I hope I didn't ruin your investigation, but I couldn't just stand there and let my wife sleep with someone as part of a business deal. I understand, Mark said. And no, you didn't mess anything up. In fact, you saved me from a meeting I was supposed to have with them at 10 o'clock last night. I was able to walk away with my cover intact and talk to Hansen again. This morning, he made me a big cash offer, which I was supposed to finalize today. I told him I'd meet him at his office Monday morning, and when he handed me the money, we'd arrest him and shut down DC&H while we conduct a full investigation into all their deals from the past 3 years. I still don't understand Kathy's role in all of this, I said. Your wife was trying to do the right thing by reporting the company, Mark explained. As for her being part of the offer, I believe Hansen pressured her. He likely blackmailed her in some way. I knew I had to find Kathy. I needed to hear her side of the story. She wasn't entirely innocent, but there were mitigating factors. That's really all I can share right now, Mark said. Do you have any more questions? Not at the moment. Good. I'd like to remind you not to discuss this investigation with anyone. Also, please don't tell your wife about the FBI operation yet. Wait until Bartlett and Hansen are indicted, and then let her know it was all part of a covert investigation. That'll happen in a few days. We'll need to speak with her then, too. I agreed to keep quiet about the investigation. Mark said he'd call me to let me know when I could tell Kathy about the FBI's involvement, and mentioned they'd likely want to question me to get my perspective. We shook hands, and I left the building. When I got home, there was a message from Kathy asking me to call her. I dialed the number she left, and a woman answered. Who's calling? She asked. Tell her it's her husband, I replied. Kathy sounded nervous when she got on the line. Where have you been? She asked shakily. I've been trying to reach you all day. Not all day, I said. I was home until 1. Oh, I guess I started calling around then. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I wanted her to take the initiative and explain what was going on, so I stayed silent. Fred, can I come home? She asked. You live here, don't you? You should already be here, I replied coldly. I'll be home in an hour. Okay, I said, and hung up. It was already 5 in the evening. I decided to make dinner for when she got back, so we could talk afterward. I cooked dinner and then went upstairs to prepare myself for what I expected would come next. Back downstairs, I picked up the blue case from the coffee table and put it in my pocket. I made spaghetti with meatballs and a salad, then opened a bottle of Chianti. Kathy walked in at 6:05 and dinner was ready. When she saw the meal and the wine, I could see the tension leave her face. She must have thought it wouldn't be as bad as she'd feared. At first, we didn't talk. We sat down, and I poured the wine. We started eating in heavy silence. After a few minutes, I broke it. Where did you stay last night? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Kathy hesitated. Did a friend drive you home after I left? I teased her, unable to resist. You didn't stay until the end of the party, I added. You practically ended the party with your speech, she responded. I guess I owe some people an apology for that. Not to you, though, and definitely not to Bartlett or Hansen. Kathy didn't argue. You're right. I owe you an apology, she said softly. She was about to continue, but I stopped her. We'll talk after dinner, I said, and we fell silent again. There wasn't much more to say over the meal. Afterward, Kathy started clearing the dishes, but I stopped her. You can clean up later. Right now we need to talk, I said. We moved to the family room and sat down facing each other. Do you want to tell me everything, or should I ask questions? Either way, I expect the truth, I said firmly. I'll tell you everything, Kathy replied, her voice trembling. I'm sure you know when it started. It was the day after your Christmas party. Jack called and said the big deal with National Pharmaceutical was in trouble. He told me that Mr. Benson had said he'd only sign the contract if I agreed to spend the night with him. I couldn't believe he'd ask me that. I was furious, but Jack said the deal was critical to the company, and if I agreed, I'd get a big reward. Lots of money and a promotion. She paused, and I let her continue without interrupting. I didn't want to do it, Fred. But Jack kept pressuring me, saying people were depending on me. I told him I needed time to think, but they confused and worried me so much that I couldn't think clearly. When you came home, I realized I couldn't do that to you. On Monday, Jack and Bartlett hounded me all day, telling me if the deal fell through, it would be my fault, and they'd fire me. Kathy's voice cracked as she looked down. They also said I'd be fired if I told anyone. I tried to hint at it to you, but I was scared. I knew if you found out the whole truth, you'd do something drastic, and I'd lose my job. On Tuesday, I told them I wouldn't do it, but they asked me to reconsider. I felt anger rising, but kept calm. Go on, I said. Hansen told me the company was missing over $100,000, and if there was an audit, it would look like I'd been embezzling. Jack said if I didn't cooperate, there would be an audit and I'd be charged. I felt trapped and had no choice. They kept telling me I was doing the right thing and that you'd understand if you knew how important the deal was. My patience was thinning. You thought I'd understand you sleeping with someone for a deal? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. You should have told me everything. I could have helped you. I know, she whispered, but I was scared. I didn't want to go to jail. When I agreed, I felt so guilty, but I was terrified of losing my job and going to prison. I could feel my pulse pounding. So you agreed to sleep with him? Kathy nodded, tears filling her eyes. Yes, but when I saw you at the party with the microphone, I panicked. I didn't know what you were going to do. I was shocked when you said I was pregnant. I didn't say you were pregnant, I replied coldly. I said we were going to have a baby. That was the plan, wasn't it? Yes, but... She hesitated. But what? Are we starting a family or not? I pressed. Yes, we are. I'll stop taking the pills tomorrow and we can start, she said quickly. I was just so stressed I wasn't thinking clearly. So Bartlett and Hansen coerced you and I ruined their deal by catching you, I said, cutting through her excuses. Is that it? Kathy looked down, her face flushed. Yes, but I don't blame you. I understand why you reacted the way you did. I'm upset with myself. Oh, great, I said sarcastically. So, you forgive me for trying to stop my wife from sleeping with another man? Kathy shook her head. That's not what I meant. I know you had every right to react the way you did. She trailed off, tears streaming. Do you think you can ever forgive me? It depends, I said flatly. Is that everything? Have you told me all I need to know? Yes, she whispered. I studied her. All right, I just have a few more questions, then we can move forward. Kathy looked at me with a glimmer of hope. What kind of questions? I tossed the blue case onto the coffee table. I found this in the trash. It's full. You threw away your birth control pills last week, didn't you? But you didn't tell me. Just now you said you'd stop taking them tomorrow. Care to explain? Kathy turned pale, her mouth opening without a word. Finally, she admitted softly. You're right. I stopped taking the pill. I thought getting pregnant would be a nice surprise since I knew you wanted a family. I stared at her in disbelief. That only works if we'd been physical engaged. But the last time we were together was before you stopped. Why didn't you tell me? Kathy's voice trembled. I was upset with what Jack and Bartlett were asking me to do. I wasn't in the mood. And did you know last night was your most fertile night? I asked. Kathy froze, shocked. No, I didn't realize that, she stammered. It's strange that you plan to sleep with Benson right in the middle of your cycle, I said. What are you implying? She asked, panicking. That I'd risk getting pregnant. I wouldn't do that. I was fed up. How long have you been with Hansen? I asked, my voice cold. Kathy's eyes widened. What? She whispered. No more lies, I said firmly. I saw Hansen kiss your stomach. Were you planning to let me think his baby was mine? Kathy broke down sobbing as I continued. You spent last night with him, didn't you? She cried uncontrollably. I left the room, packed my suitcase, and when I returned, she jumped up, pleading, Please don't leave me. I love you. Jack blackmailed me. I kept packing. Why didn't you just keep taking the pills and lie to Jack? You had no problem lying to me. I wasn't thinking straight. I was scared. I didn't stop. I guess I believe what you told him more than anything you've told me. Her sobs filled the room as I continued packing. By the way, I said, I heard you tell him I love you last night. Kathy froze, guilt and panic in her eyes. I don't love him, Fred, she cried. If I get pregnant, I'll have infanticide. Please, I love you. No, I said coldly. Don't do it because of me. You made your choice. She collapsed, sobbing on the floor as I walked out. When I glanced back, all I felt was disgust. I didn't love her anymore, and the house no longer held any meaning for me. It's been over 2 years since I left Kathy. After that night, I got an apartment and started over. That's when the nightmares began. Unsatisfied with my life, I quit my job, moved to California, and started my own investigation company. I called my old friend Bill Ripley, who joined me a few months later. Bill told me Mary Farrell had heard about our company and wanted to work with us. She moved to California, and 2 months later, we started dating. We moved in together 3 months after that. I was surprised at how quickly I fell in love again. While I wasn't rushing to remarry, I was glad to have someone I cared about to share my life with. I've kept a few connections in Indianapolis, including Special Agent Mark Walker, who kept me updated after the investigation. It turned out that on Jack Hansen's orders, Kathy had been digging into the company president and CEO, hoping to expose their shady deals and have the board fire them. Hansen had dreams of becoming the next president of DC&H. Kathy wasn't lying about not loving Hansen. She was using him, knowing he was in love with her. She believed if he succeeded, she'd get everything she wanted. Hansen and his wife didn't have children, which he blamed on her. After I left, he tried for over a month to get Kathy pregnant, but it didn't work. He was infertile. Hansen's wife found out about the affair and divorced him. A month later, he was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for his actions at DC, and H. Bartlett also got 2 years in a minimum security prison. Kathy was fired, and the company was bought out by a larger consulting firm. Last I heard, Kathy is teaching accounting at a community college in Ohio. I don't think about her much. The wounds are still too fresh. I don't miss her, and Mary has filled the space Kathy left in my life, which is why I married her. Now, I'm sitting here, looking at Mary, thinking about waking her. Not to tell her I had a dream, but to say I love her. Last night, she told me that whenever I'm ready for a baby, all I have to do is ask. Just order early, she joked, because labor takes 9 months. I might place that order tomorrow. Oh, and in case you're wondering, DC&H stands for Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe.
I discovered my wife's cheating after finding something in her purse that unraveled the truth. My name is Sal, short for Salvatore, and I'm from Italy. My parents moved to the United Kingdom in the late 1960s. We had a popular Italian restaurant that not only supported my immediate family but also extended to distant relatives, including many cousins. Though we're not always in each other's pockets, we're a close-knit family. We make an effort to gather for family events to avoid our beloved grandmother's disapproving gaze. She's the matriarch of our clan. 7 years ago, Connie, who always insisted on obedience, became my wife. We both decided to marry around the age of 30 after being in a relationship without a clear direction. Although it was satisfying in some ways, it lacked the elements needed for a long-term commitment. For almost 2 years, we enjoyed each other's company, attended parties, and had a great time before deciding to exchange vows. Unfortunately, my grandmother never fully accepted Connie, maintaining a tolerant attitude towards her. She was never openly rude, but there was always a look of disbelief in her eyes, as if she expected Connie to make a mistake. Where women get such intuition is a mystery to me. My grandmother had a tough time hiding her emotions from my wife, even though she never expressed her opinions in front of others. Just before our marriage, my grandmother warned me to keep an eye on Connie, expressing concerns about something bothering her. These words continued to echo in my head for unknown reasons. About a month ago, I discovered that my wife was secretly dating another man. They met regularly for at least 6 months, and I found out after a thorough investigation. Surprisingly, finding the truth wasn't as difficult as I expected. One evening, a small oversight on her part raised suspicions. It all started with a minor detail: a pen. A cheap, ordinary pen usually given as a hotel souvenir. Its sudden appearance puzzled me, because I couldn't recall staying at the hotel from where she got it. I usually prefer well-known hotel chains about once a month, although I'm accumulating loyalty points. But they're not that great. One evening, while walking with Connie, I needed a pen. She rummaged in her big purse and pulled one out for me. However, after finishing writing, I noticed an inscription on the handle that caused a small alarm. I knew I hadn't stayed at the hotel indicated on the pen, leading to my confusion. Without saying a word, I handed the pen back to Connie. Although seemingly insignificant, this small crack in our marriage could lead to significant consequences. Strangely, I chose to push it aside as we were meeting friends for a delightful evening over dinner, drinks, and dancing. With two other couples, we found ourselves in the cozy lounge bar of our favorite restaurant just when the infamous pen made its significant move. It was a place where we always felt comfortable and could enjoy a relaxed atmosphere. Additionally, the restaurant owner was one of my cousins, allowing us a generous family discount. We reciprocated by expressing our support for the establishment. The discounts helped us strike the perfect balance between gratitude and not undermining the owner's authority, a mutually beneficial arrangement that worked harmoniously. The other couples present that evening were Carlo and his wife, Joanna, as well as Phil and Terry. Carlo and Joanna were a bit older than us, about 5 years. Despite our distant relationship, we still considered ourselves a family. Carlo had somewhat old-fashioned behavior, and his life was quite interesting, although not entirely within the law. Despite his formidable personality, underneath the intimidating exterior was an incredibly kind and gentle person. You couldn't find a better person unless you managed to upset him. Just one piece of advice: don't. Carlo was like an older brother to me, always ready to support and be a reliable companion who knew how to keep me out of trouble. His wife, Joanna, was a charming woman who shared a deep love with Carlo, making them an ideal couple. She was not only beautiful but also the only person who could intimidate Carlo, although he openly adored her without any doubt. I was fortunate to get to know Phil through work, and we immediately found a common language. We were the same age and had similar views on life. Sometimes we played golf together, and our friendship went beyond the golf course. Phil's wife, Terry, joined us during chats at the golf club, and everything seemed to be going well. It was noticeable that Terry and Connie got along well. Often they spent days on excessive shopping trips, buying everything in a row and spending what felt like an eternity on it. All I saw were the huge bags that Connie brought home after such outings. While Phil was consistently warm and friendly, Terry sometimes seemed distant, especially lately. But there came a moment when she suddenly joined the team completely. I often suspected something was wrong with her and repeatedly told Connie about it. However, she brushed it off, resorting to the typical excuses about women's problems when a woman doesn't want to share something. While we were in a comfortable area enjoying cocktails, Carlo and Joanna entered. I stood up to warmly greet them with hugs and kisses. A prompt waiter quickly brought new drinks to our table. Connie was always amazed at how well we were treated wherever we went. Considering the 6 of us, my cousin efficiently directed us to our reserved table, our usual spot with both privacy and a view of the entrance. Carlo always preferred this window view, and although curious, we didn't ask why. Joanna inquired about Phil and Terry, mentioning she had talked to Connie earlier and knew they might be a bit late since Phil was not home yet. Observing the interaction between the two women, Carlo gave me a significant look. I met his gaze, but he subtly shook his head, choosing to leave things as they were. I mentally noted to discuss this with Carlo later. After finishing our first drinks, Phil and Terry finally arrived, looking a bit flushed. Carlo watched them with an unfathomable expression. I noticed the familiar look again and wondered what Carlo knew. Something important was definitely happening. As we settled into our seats, we quickly delved into discussions about work, upcoming plans, and the usual talk about our families and children. After a delightful meal, we returned to the lounge area with music playing. At this point, the girls were eager to hit the dance floor. The 3 of us guys sat for a while, realizing our duty was to accompany them. Carlo took the lead and escorted Joanna back to our table after the first song. Glancing around, I noticed Phil and Terry still on the dance floor, but there was an awkwardness between them. I quietly asked Connie if they were okay. She replied, "I think so." Terry didn't talk about anything. A second look at her made me realize something was definitely wrong. Phil and Terry joined us at the table, but Terry quickly excused herself, saying she needed to go to the restroom. Carlo casually asked Phil if everything was all right. Phil calmly replied, "Yes, it's fine, just maybe a little too much." He signaled to pour more, and the waiter brought a new round of drinks before the women returned. The nonverbal signs revealed true feelings. Connie's gaze conveyed anxiety, and Carlos subtly nudged me, hinting at hidden knowledge. He winked, confirming he knew something important. To ease the tension, we continued changing partners for a few more dances, but as we prepared to leave, I noticed Connie talking to Phil at the other end of the hall. This extra detail of the evening didn't escape my notice. I thought about asking her later, but changed my mind. After saying goodbye, we took separate taxis. Curiosity got the better of me, and I couldn't resist asking about Phil and Terry the next day. "What happened to them?" I asked directly. She reassured me everything was fine, but as she looked out the window, I felt something was wrong. Not understanding what exactly was the matter, I decided to contact Carlo the next morning. That night, Connie tried to reassure me with closeness, reminding me of her love. However, an odd feeling persisted. Something was amiss, but I couldn't pinpoint it. "Darling, always remember that I love you too. You are my wife, and no one will ever separate us. I will never give you a reason to doubt it." Hugging her tightly, I showered her face with kisses, and we fell asleep. Yet the unusual events of that evening lingered in my mind. Realizing I needed to contact Carlo first thing in the morning, Connie went to the gym early the next day. Aimlessly wandering around, I drank refreshing orange juice, attempting to clear my clouded mind. Sitting at my laptop, I began searching for the hotel engraved on the pen handle in Connie's purse. After a thorough Google search, I discovered its location conveniently close, but on the other side of London. I noted down contact details, and my skepticism led me to study the hotel's history for potential clues. Unfortunately, my investigation yielded nothing significant. I was ready to leave. I called Carlo, expressing my concern about Phil and Terry. The unease in my voice must have been apparent as I asked, "What's up with Phil and Terry? Should I be worried?" Carlo suggested meeting at his brother's bar at noon to discuss it face-to-face, urging me to come alone. Assuring him, I agreed, and the call ended, leaving me with a growing sense of anxiety. As the day unfolded, I shared my plans with Connie, assuring her it wouldn't take long. Her curiosity led her to inquire, "What does he want to say?" The concern in her eyes mirrored the growing unease I felt. A sense of foreboding accompanied me as I drove to Carlo's house. Carlo greeted me and, without words, gestured for me to follow him. We navigated through the bar, entering utility rooms until we reached a secluded, office-like space. As we sat on opposite sides of a large oak table, Carlo's solemnity was palpable. He began, "I promised your father I'd always protect you, and I intend to keep that promise, but what I'm about to tell you will be hard to hear." The pain in his eyes heightened my apprehension, and my thoughts raced, anticipating the revelation's gravity. Carlo handed me a large manila envelope, emphasizing the weight of the moment. "Remember, I'm here for you, okay?" The deliberate movements and the suffering in his gaze hinted at the seriousness of what lay inside. Opening the envelope, glossy photos unfolded, revealing my wife in different poses with another man in a shabby hotel room. Shocked, I could hardly process the sight before me. Carlo's voice broke through my awareness haze as my marriage unraveled before my eyes. Tears streamed down my face and I locked eyes with Carlo, desperate for answers. How? When? Who is he? The torrent of emotions, shock, fear, and anger swirled within me as I clung to Carlo's promise of support in the midst of this unexpected storm. Carlo stammered, his voice trembling as he informed me about Connie's suspicious actions. He had heard rumors a few weeks ago, but only gathered concrete evidence recently. Before our recent date, he discovered some unsettling details. According to him, Connie was spotted in a restaurant in South London with a man who seemed overly friendly. The familiarity between them suggested a connection to Tony Drew, Phil's brother. Recalling our night walk, Carlo pointed out the exchanged glances between Phil, Connie, and Terry, which now made sense. Confirming my suspicions, he mentioned seeing Connie's pen from a hotel in London. I inquired if it had happened there, and Carlo nodded in agreement. Expressing my determination, I told Carlo that my assistant had been monitoring their actions since the beginning of the previous week. I wanted to confront the man face to face, but Carlo cautioned against rash actions that could lead to serious consequences. He advised divorcing Connie and leaving him to handle the situation. Rejecting his suggestion, I insisted on handling it personally and wanted information on the man's residence, workplace, and other details. Carlo acknowledged having the information in the envelope, but stressed the importance of careful planning to avoid legal consequences. He proposed a strategic approach to eliminate any possibility of ending up in prison and asked for my agreement on the plan. It seems the person in question is currently single but has been through a divorce. Even though he doesn't have kids, he seems to prefer women, especially those who are already married. Maybe he's not into commitments. "What are your thoughts on this?" "How well do you get along with your friend Phil?" Carlo asked. "I'm asking because he behaved oddly at the restaurant where Terry and your wife were. I've been keeping a close eye on him and suspect he might be aware of what's happening. If that's true, can we still consider him a friend?" "I noticed that too," I replied, "and I'm starting to suspect his wife is involved in this, judging by their behavior. I see no reason to continue being around them more than necessary. So I think we should end this as soon as possible. If this was an isolated incident, I might not have paid attention, but after seeing it, I can't forget about it. It's all too overwhelming. Every time I see her, these images will haunt me. No, I can't forgive or forget." "I understand," Carlo said, "but in the current situation, you should prioritize your own protection. Taking the time to plan ahead will be helpful, even if it requires some patience. Trust me, you're going to need retribution." I informed Carlo that I needed time to carefully consider the situation, expressing my desire for both Phil and Connie to suffer. Leaning in, Carlo placed a business card in front of me, explaining that it belonged to an experienced specialist who was already informed about my situation. He encouraged me to call the specialist and convey what needed to be done, assuring me that he was also our cousin. Carlo chuckled at the connection between the specialist and our family. "We have cousins everywhere," he joked. I couldn't help but chuckle as well. We continued to discuss our plan for another hour until we decided on a course of action. I dialed Cousin Carl's number. We agreed to postpone its execution until all preparations were completed. Meanwhile, I had to find out the extent of Phil and his wife Terry's involvement in the situation. Leaving Carlo behind, I drove slowly back home. After parking the car, I went to the door, but there was no sound inside. Connie was not there. In the kitchen, I found a note on the table indicating that she had gone to Terry's. Understanding the message, I discarded the note and promptly contacted Carlo, informing him of Connie's claim. Despite her assertion, my surveillance revealed that Connie was currently at Phil and Terry's house, though Terry herself was absent. As mentioned earlier, I had someone keeping an eye on her, and he'd continue to do so. Later, 3 hours passed, and Connie finally returned home. Greeting me, she kissed my cheek and headed to the kitchen. When she inquired about my day, I mentioned Carlo's plan without divulging details. Observing her expectation for more information, after a minute of anticipation, she asked about the discussion. I replied that it concerned a cousin's personal file requiring permission and involved suspicions about a wife's behavior, seeking advice. Noticing the change in her expression, I smiled, acknowledging her attempt to appear nonchalant. Nevertheless, I reassured her that everything would be resolved in the end. She turned away, and the rest of the weekend dragged on slowly. Despite the strong desire, I could not bring myself to make love to her. I couldn't help but look at the photos that Carlo shared with me, where she is captured with Tony. I was surprised how she could continue a relationship with him and still behave completely normally around me. She had an exceptional talent for deception and acting, far surpassing all my ideas. Saturday night passed without any major problems, but on Sunday night, her body language made it clear that she wanted closeness. I kissed her gently, but the image of her with Tony wouldn't leave my mind, making me doubt that she really could only be mine. It felt like a betrayal. We both lay in bed in silence, lost in our thoughts. As soon as she fell asleep, I quietly slipped out of bed and went downstairs. I was sitting at my computer, immersed in work, when a message from Carlo caught my attention. Looking at my watch, I realized that it was about 1 a.m. Everything seemed to fall into place and completely coincided with our previous conversations. Feeling confident in my abilities, I came to the conclusion that now it remains only to plan a short trip with an overnight stay on Wednesday, and it will be possible to get down to business. I quickly replied to Carlo's message, confirming my agreement, but sleep did not come, and anger boiled inside me. In the morning, after a quick shower, I got dressed and went downstairs. Connie greeted me with a warm smile and served me a delicious breakfast, coffee, and toast. She settled into her seat and sipped her coffee delicately. I mentioned that I had to go to Leeds on Wednesday, and as I spoke, her eyes met mine over the rim of her cup. Sensing her thoughts, she casually inquired if I would only be gone for one night. I affirmed, but added that I wouldn't return until late Thursday night. Her gaze intensified as she asked if this was related to Carlo and the cousin I had mentioned, suggesting he might need support. Expressing my unease about Carlo, I admitted uncertainty regarding the kind of help he could provide. Reassuringly, she mentioned that I might be surprised, highlighting Carlo's formidable problem-solving abilities. Observing her pale expression, I realized she was actively formulating a plan in her mind. Glancing at my watch, I stood up from my seat, signaling the start of the workday. "It was time for me to leave, my dear. Take care of yourself and behave while I'm away," I said. I went to a meeting with a lawyer, discussed options for an hour, and signed the necessary documents. The lawyer already had copies of the envelope's contents. He assured me everything would be ready by Wednesday afternoon. Confirming our agreement, I hurried to the bank and moved all our savings to a new account in my name. Additionally, I sent a significant amount to Carlo, asking him to hold it for me. I left the current account alone, covering our bills, but we had almost no extra money. I emptied our safe deposit box of cash and jewelry, opening a separate account only in my name at another bank. I also decided to stop her allowance, thinking it would put her in a tough spot by the end of the month. Happy with my day, I entered my office and went about my usual work. Sadie, my secretary, was an invaluable assistant, handling work competently, maybe even more so than me. During a momentary break in signing documents, I noticed Sadie looking at me. Turning my chair, I faced her. We've known each other for almost 5 years. She's always been professional and devoted, though tension with Connie seemed present. I believed it was related to gender issues. Looking into Sadie's worried eyes, I realized I could no longer ignore the situation. The desire to confide in someone became overwhelming, and she sensed my inner turmoil. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my thoughts and informed her about potential disruptions this week. I emphasized that if I couldn't be there, she knew what needed to be done to ensure everything ran smoothly. She assured me of her support. Curious if she could assist further, Sadie turned around, a refined and intelligent woman of about 40 whom I trusted implicitly. Confessing to her, I revealed that Connie was cheating on me. Clearly taken aback, Sadie expressed her disbelief and asked if I had concrete evidence. Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded in confirmation. Feeling my pain, Sadie hugged me tightly, providing the comfort and support that seemed absent at home. Tears streamed down for the first time since I received the devastating news a few days earlier. She held me until I regained my composure. Looking into my tear-filled eyes and reassuring me of my goodness, she encouraged me not to let anyone tell me otherwise. Concerned about my future plans, she inquired about my intentions. Determined, I stated my decision to file for divorce and end the relationship completely. Despite my hesitation, I made it clear that I didn't want to involve her or anyone else. Worried, Sadie urged me to be careful and pleaded for a promise not to do anything rash. The rest of the day felt like a drag, each moment seeming like hard work. Sadie's devotion and support were invaluable, turning her into a precious friend who stood by me during this challenging time. Her husband, whoever he was undoubtedly lucky. She fearlessly protected me from any threats, dealing with them with her usual flair. I heard her push someone away with a stern warning, making me smile. I was pleased to have kind-hearted people like her by my side. When I got home, sitting with Connie and watching TV, the phone rang. She took it to the hallway to answer. Although I heard her speaking softly, the conversation remained unintelligible. After about 5 minutes, she returned. Curious, I inquired about the phone call. Connie dismissed it as unimportant, mentioning Terry discussing her claims and Phil initiating another pointless argument with a hint of annoyance in her tone. I hope they find a way to reconcile, she added. Sensing my confusion, I asked, "What do you mean? Are they in serious trouble?" Sensing my confusion, I asked, "What do you mean? Are they in serious trouble?" Phil didn't say anything, Connie replied, carefully watching my expression. I searched for signs that might reveal the truth. "Well," she began hesitantly, "it's not really a serious crisis, more of a small disagreement. I'm sure they'll sort it out." Suddenly it dawned on me. "Is this really what happened when we were in the restaurant?" I asked. Connie looked at me nervously, not realizing I had noticed the tension between them and her role in it. While spinning a web of lies, it became noticeable that Connie was entangled in her own deception. Despite her discomfort, I couldn't figure out Terry and Phil's role in this situation. I remembered their intense communication during our walk, an argument boiling all evening. "So, that's what you talked to Phil about?" I asked, trying to figure out if she was trying to mediate. Connie's response was restrained and somewhat frank. "Yes, Terry asked me to talk to Phil, that's all." Intrigued, I continued to extract information. "What was it about, Connie? Perhaps I can help." A smile appeared when I saw my wife struggle with the tangled web of lies. Sensing her anxiety, she calmed me down. "It's all right, S. I'm sure they are close to solving their problems," she offered optimistically. Expressing relief, I acknowledged the good news about my friend's improving marriage. However, a sudden anxiety prompted me to ask if he was cheating. Connie swiftly reassured me that there was nothing of that sort. My curiosity lingered, leading me to inquire if Terry might be cheating. Sensing my curiosity, Connie suggested not getting involved and letting them figure it out. Fully agreeing, I remarked, "That's precisely what I had in mind. However, when I see Phil, I might check to ensure he's okay." As I shifted my attention back to the TV, Connie's narrowed eyes signaled the end of our discussion. After a few minutes, I revisited the topic, questioning, what was the conversation really about if neither of them was cheating? Unable to resist, Connie abruptly left the sofa, visibly agitated, and hurried out of the room. I sat and chuckled to myself. By now, I had enough information, but the other couple's role was still a mystery. The rest of the evening passed with mutual avoidance, and we both preferred silence to more discussion. Deciding to address the issue of Phil and Terry the next day, I woke up early on Tuesday. I left the house just as Connie was coming down the stairs, still looking a little puzzled. "I have to move. Lots to do before I leave tomorrow," I told her without staying long and headed for the garage. As I moved, my thoughts returned to recent events. Until last week, everything was relatively calm. That changed when Connie met Tony a few months ago during a night out with Terry. They were in a small club with friends when Tony walked in, offered to buy everyone a drink, and caught the girls' attention. During that meeting, Terry noticed a connection between Tony and Connie. Worried, Terry expressed concern about Tony's character to her friend. She advised her to stay away from him, mentioning that he had made advances towards her in the past. In an attempt to calm Terry, Connie reassured her, stating that she had her phone with her and noting that Tony was an attractive and smooth man. Terry shook her head, emphasizing her warning and urging Connie not to entertain the thought. Terry had done her duty as a protector, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something unsettling was behind Connie's eyes. The rest of the evening passed without any notable incidents, at least from Terry's point of view. Despite Terry's warning, Tony managed to get Connie's phone number. Over the next few days, Tony somehow got Connie's number and made several calls involving her in innocent conversations accompanied by light flirting. As the next bachelorette party approached, Connie realized that Tony would be attending again. This time, there was dancing, and as soon as Tony took her in his arms, he began to use seduction tactics, showering her with flattery and compliments. He began numerous subtle touches while they were talking. Leaving the club with Terry's worried friend, who scolded her and urged her to end it before something happened, Connie stubbornly kept silent, brushing off Terry's warnings and insisting that nothing had happened yet. But when Terry saw her, Tony just smiled resolutely, continuing to get his way, confident that he would eventually win Connie over. In the following weeks, phone conversations between Connie and Tony became more frequent, and their flirting intensified. Tony began to seriously pursue Connie. The dynamic changed when Terry was unable to join their usual night out, giving Tony the opportunity he had been waiting for. It was during one of their conversations that he saw a chance to make his move. Tony, using his charm, managed to convince Connie to meet him at the club, emphasizing that it would be a friendly relationship, nothing more. Connie thought about the idea and, seizing on a sudden opportunity, eagerly agreed to the meeting. Unlike her usual outfit for meeting Terry, Connie dressed up, feeling that this occasion had special meaning. Excitement bubbled in her veins. Overcoming any doubts she may have had, she couldn't hide her joy and she didn't want to. In her opinion, talking to Tony created a connection, and she was ready for the next step. Without slowing down, she grabbed her purse and headed for the front door. Unable to contain her excitement, that important evening marked the start of a new chapter in Connie and Tony's life. Their bond grew stronger, and meetings became more frequent. Their evening was filled with flirting, gentle touches, and playful dancing. Tony took her to his car and drove her to the Marriott Hotel, believing Connie was ready for the next step. They spent the night together, their passion lasting until almost 1 a.m. When Connie realized the time, panic set in. She quickly got ready and dressed, urging Tony to take her home. Despite Tony's agreement, the journey alone would have taken at least another 30 minutes. That night served as a wake-up call for Connie, and she started feeling uneasy. But in the following weeks, she continued dating Tony, unable to resist the temptation of their connection. During my absence, she stayed with Tony at the hotel, engaging in various activities. Terry advised Connie to stop before facing consequences. Weeks later, Terry discussed the situation with her husband, Phil, hoping he could influence Tony. Terry explicitly asked Connie to stop and talk to Tony, seeking Phil's support. Phil was torn between loyalty to his brother and me, making it increasingly difficult to find a solution without causing serious consequences. Connie knew their romance should end soon. She understood the risk she was taking increased the allure of continuing the illicit relationship. It was a dangerous game, and if anyone found out, chaos would follow. The recent restaurant incident, combined with leading questions, showed the situation was getting out of control. Connie understood Tony didn't have sincere feelings, considering her only as an opportunity. Despite this, she still felt drawn to him. Deciding that tomorrow would mark the last meeting and the end of the destructive cycle, Connie made up her mind, intending to end it after one final night together. Despite the decision, she still had to convince Tony. Late at night, legal documents from the lawyer were prepared in her car. Feeling tense, I sought solace in my trusted bottle of whiskey. Observing Connie, it was clear she grappled with her problems. When she inquired about my well-being, I didn't immediately respond. Instead, I turned to her, meeting her eyes to gauge her reaction. She seemed scared and anxious, evidently affected by the events of the past day. I muttered that it had been a tough day and mentioned the need to shower for the upcoming meeting with Carlo. The mention of Carlo appeared to disturb her, carrying a sense of horror. After the shower, I went downstairs, catching Connie's gaze in the kitchen. Casually asking about dinner, she suggested ordering takeout, expressing her reluctance to cook. I agreed, and we settled on Chinese cuisine. I called and placed the order, and while waiting, we sat in the living room with the TV on. Dinner passed quietly, almost in suspense. Connie casually inquired about my departure time the next morning, to which I explained my plan to leave around 9 a.m. for an 11 flight. I added that the issue couldn't be addressed until the evening, and that it would be an opportunity to finally meet cousin Carlo, trying to find a positive aspect in the current situation. Acknowledging the importance of family, Connie looked at me with a hint of sadness in her eyes. Perhaps she was contemplating that tomorrow could mark the end of it all. The next morning, I woke up to the delightful smell of freshly brewed coffee, a scent I always appreciated at the start of the day. While I sipped the hot coffee, which served as a magical elixir that fully awakened me, Connie was preparing breakfast. I sat down at the table and began to eat toast, my stomach still feeling heavy from last night's dinner. Silence filled the kitchen while we both enjoyed coffee. A calm atmosphere prevailed. We exchanged fleeting glances, but quickly averted our eyes to avoid giving ourselves away. The atmosphere was tense, and we both wanted it to be over. Checking my watch, I realized it was time to leave. Urgently, I mentioned that I had to go and pick up Carlo from home. As I passed Connie, she looked at me with a smile and wished me a safe journey and a speedy return. Moving forward, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders, and tears welled up in my eyes. With a deep sigh of relief, I turned the steering wheel and drove away from my wife, deciding not to look back. My face was flooded with tears, and my heart was heavy with grief. It was a day of reckoning, the culmination of it all. A few minutes later, Connie picked up the phone and listened to the beeps in her ear. She whispered that I was gone and asked if the plan could still proceed that night. The response was affirmative, with assurances of making the night unforgettable. Connie explained that she had convinced Phil to leave them alone and shared that he was becoming increasingly upset with her. She inquired if he had mentioned anything to me, and the answer was affirmative, but she had instructed him to mind his own business. Despite the challenges, she expressed eagerness for the night ahead and shared the arrangements for their meeting at the same room as last time. Ending the call, the man couldn't help but smile. He quickly composed a text message with the details of the lovers' date, collected his listening equipment, and left the place of observation. Carlo looked at the message, a grim smile appearing on his face. He expressed concern about the situation and questioned my certainty about it. I assured him of my love for Connie and my determination to make her understand the gravity of her actions, even if it meant enduring lasting consequences with her lover. With some time before the action started, we decided to have a snack. Carlo dissuaded me from reaching out to Terry and Phil, emphasizing the potential legal consequences if they became aware of my awareness. He assured me that there would be time to address that later and asked me not to worry. Leaving the bar, I was introduced to Carlo's brother Alfredo and his daughter Alicia. Alfredo apologized for his daughter's impulsive nature and explained that they can be assertive these days. Expressing understanding, I greeted Alfredo warmly, emphasizing the importance of family. Alfredo smiled and conveyed his regards to his wife and the rest of his family. A little after 3 p.m, an incoming call signal was heard on my mobile phone. Glancing at the screen, I noticed that it was Connie. I greeted her and asked what had happened. She explained that she called to ensure I had arrived safely and inquired if everything was okay. I assured her that we were both fine and mentioned that we were having a late lunch before continuing on our way. Curious about her evening plans, I asked about her intentions, subtly concealing my true agenda. She mentioned that she was going to visit Terry and believed everything was fine there. I responded, trying to maintain a neutral tone. Continuing the conversation, I casually mentioned that I was planning to call Phil later, as I believed he was going out with his brother. Expressing curiosity about Phil's brother, I inquired about his personality. Connie offered a vague response, mentioning that she had only met him once but found him to be somewhat similar to Phil. With a brief farewell, I explained that we needed to check into the hotel before our evening meeting. Wishing her a pleasant evening and asking her to say hello to Terry, I ended the call. I looked at Carlo, and he sensed the hidden pain in my expression. He offered his support, acknowledging that it was done, and suggested we go meet the others. Leaving Alfredo at the bar, we proceeded to the private rooms, where Carlo introduced me to a group of 4 people familiar to him. He assured me of their trustworthiness, emphasizing that they had proven themselves countless times in the past. At that moment, Carlo's phone rang, and after answering the call, he nodded, relaying the message that we would be leaving in 5 minutes. Observing my watch, I noticed it was already 8. Time was slipping away fast. The guys left the room and headed to the waiting car. They grabbed a minibus to reach their destination. At the same time, Carlo and I went out the back door and hopped into the prepared Mercedes. This is how my story brought me to where I am now. We parked the Mercedes on a quiet street, just 200 meters from the hotel. In silence, we sat there, and by 9 p.m, Carlo's phone signaled a message. After confirming the team's arrival and placement, we stayed silent until another message appeared on Carlo's phone, indicating that the exit was guarded. "Okay, let's go," Carlo said, breaking the silence. After a moment, I followed suit, and we headed for the hotel lobby. Time seemed to have sped up. My heart raced with anticipation. Carlo got out of the car first and directed me to the indicated room number. Reaching door 415, a feeling nagged at me that my wife might be behind it with another man. Just as we reached the door, 4 men in hotel-style uniforms seemed to appear out of nowhere. Glancing around the corridor, relieved it was empty, Carlo warned about the nearby CCTV cameras. Leading the team into the bedroom, Carlo's determined eyes met mine. The lights turned on, revealing a scene that left my heart sinking. From my vantage point, I could see my wife in bed with Tony, oblivious to the impending intrusion. The details of what happened to her lover are hard to convey in this context. Everything unfolded in a whirlwind of emotions. Turning on the light, I entered the room. My wife, lying on the bed, locked eyes with me. Shuddering, she tightly shielded herself, tears streaming down her face. Muffled sobs and unintelligible mutterings escaped her mouth. Love and hate collided, and rage took the forefront among the overwhelming feelings. Carlo stepped forward, gripping my arm and gently taking an object from my hand. His determined eyes met mine, urging me to calm down and gain control of my emotions. At this moment, Connie, consumed by fear, stared at the two imposing figures in front of her, shaking her head vigorously. Tears streamed down her face as she remained wordless, intensifying the destruction of her evening. Sensing it was time to leave, I observed a subtle movement from Carlo, who was checking his phone. He mentioned that it was time for us to depart. Following him out of the room and leaving Connie behind, Carlo remarked that I had handled the situation well. He added that, for a moment, he thought I might lose control of my anger. I responded with a grim laugh, assuring him that, so far, it was just a good scare. The real lesson will be when she meets Tony again, I explained, and there's no need for me to get my hands dirty since the guys will handle him properly. Carlo understood my desire for Tony to know I was there, but assured me that Tony wouldn't forget the experience anytime soon. As we walked through dimly lit streets towards our destination, Carlo mentioned that rooms were ready for both of us when we were ready. We entered the bar, where Alfredo awaited us. Approaching, in the morning, Carlo's phone beeped with a message, confirming that everything was settled. Expressing my gratitude for what they did, I started to muse, but Carlo interrupted me, stating that it was over and I needed to figure out the situation with her. Understanding his point, no further words were exchanged. The weight of the situation pressed on me. As we left her at the hotel, I wondered how she would find her way home and what she would say about this unexpected turn of events. Now aware that I knew about her actions, would she admit to them or remain silent? Despite catching her in the act, I doubted she would willingly confess. Carlo's words brought me back. Rooms are prepared for both of you when you are ready. Unable to sleep, I replayed the events of the previous night in my mind, thinking through every detail. Thoughts of Connie filled my mind, and a heavy sadness settled within me. She was the love of my life, my everything, and now it's all been destroyed. The only way left was to face her and see how this would unfold. Divorce papers were already in my hands, with the official copy supposed to be delivered today. Returning home, she wouldn't have doubts about what I knew. A chilling thought crossed my mind. What if she doesn't come home? Uncertainty added complexity to an already turbulent situation. Now that she knew I caught her at the hotel, Connie would likely be afraid to return home. I realized I needed to take measures, possibly rescheduling the delivery of the divorce papers to wherever she could find refuge, maybe with Terry. Almost 7 hours had passed when Alicia abruptly woke me, informing me it was lunchtime and that I had 30 minutes. Carlo mentioned I had to catch an afternoon flight, so it was time to get up. Getting dressed, I saw a changed version of myself in the mirror, bearing the weight of recent events and signs of change. Sitting down with the others at the table, I sensed that the feeling of normality had turned surreal, yet oddly comforting. We shared a meal, talked, and even laughed. But time passed too quickly, and it was soon time to leave. Gathering our belongings, we headed to the waiting car. As we drove away, I gazed out the window, bidding farewell to the faces watching us. On the way home, I drove steadily and calmly. I dropped off Carlo, and Joanna welcomed him with joy, hugging him tightly like newlyweds. She then turned to me, offering a tight hug for comfort. Carlo reassured me, expressing his belief that everything would eventually be fine. Despite my speechlessness, his comforting hug offered a glimmer of hope. Departing with a plan to call later, I nodded in confirmation and drove home, attempting to avoid dwelling on empty thoughts. Upon reaching my front door and entering, an eerie silence pervaded the house. The heating provided warmth, but the cozy atmosphere was absent. With cautious steps, I explored the living room and kitchen, noting the emptiness and quietness. Checking my mobile phone, I found no calls or messages from Connie. Overwhelmed with disappointment and sadness, I sank into a chair in the living room. A photo of Connie and me on the mantel caught my eye, sparking anger. I impulsively threw the framed photo across the room as it crashed against the wall. The phone rang. With apprehension and curiosity, I answered the call, still carrying a residual tone of anger. "Hello," I responded. A hesitant female voice on the other end identified herself as Terry. Despite my harsh tone, she inquired about Connie, revealing that Connie was with her, upset and afraid to go home. Suppressing my anger, I asked Terry to let Connie talk to me. Advising Terry to ask Connie about the events, I listened as the conversation unfolded. After a while, Terry returned to the phone, expressing genuine concern for Connie, who remained silent. I instructed Terry to tell Connie that I would pick her up. In the background, I heard Connie scream, confirming my suspicions. Terry, uncertain of what to say, stammered, and I calmly acknowledged that I knew everything. Apologizing, Terry shared her unsuccessful attempts to stop the events with Phil. Expressing my sadness over the situation, I mentioned the impact on our friendship, but suggested avoiding further discussion. In response, Terry whispered an understanding acknowledgement and apologized once again. I took a deep breath, attempting to find some semblance of completeness in the midst of turmoil. With gratitude, I thanked Terry, acknowledging that our once strong friendship had been irreparably changed by the actions of those involved. Ending the conversation, I informed Terry that I wouldn't be coming for Connie, advising her to relay the message. I sternly instructed Terry that Connie's belongings would be packed and ready for her to collect, with a warning that any delay would result in disposal. Emphasizing that Connie no longer lived with me, I mentioned that some papers for her would be delivered to my address and urged caution in any actions or attempts to contact me. I stressed the need for careful consideration. Clearly and with strength, I spoke to Terry, laying out all the details and emphasizing that I hadn't heard from Connie since around 7:30 p.m. I anticipated some reaction after she received the documents, but according to Terry, Connie appeared very nervous when she arrived at their house. Carlo, finding humor in the situation, grinned, thinking about the upcoming day. I mentally listed tasks that needed attention. First, contacting my office to clarify work matters, then dealing with a locksmith, addressing banking issues, and handling logistics. Painful as it was to admit, the trust we once shared had completely vanished. Remaining in this relationship after the divorce papers were delivered last night was impossible. I expected to hear from Connie today, once she gathered her thoughts. But it was already 9 when a knock interrupted my thoughts. Upon opening the door, I found Terry and Phil standing there. Their unexpected presence cast a shadow in the room. Waiting in silence, Terry eventually spoke, expressing remorse for their actions. Acknowledging their request to come in, I gestured toward the living room. As they settled on the sofa, I took a chair, bracing myself for the necessary conversation. Curious, I asked, "So, what did you guys want to discuss?" Paying close attention to Terry and Phil, I listened as Phil began with an apology, admitting his failure to inform me about Connie's extramarital pursuits. Terry echoed his sentiments, expressing regret for being unable to reach Connie and prevent her actions. While their words evoked a sense of offense and betrayal, I recognized the sincerity behind their apologies. Wanting clarity, I questioned Terry about her statement that Connie didn't understand anything. Confused and concerned, I asked, "What do you mean, Terry? I was away on Wednesday, and when I called, Connie mentioned being left by Tony at a hotel. Are you suggesting something happened between them?" Phil, filled with concern, replied, "We're not certain. We tried contacting my brother, but there's been no response. Connie is unable to provide much information. All she said was that she felt tied up and that Tony had left her at the hotel." The growing anxiety within me intensified as I struggled to comprehend the events between Connie and Tony. Pressing for more details, I directed my disappointment toward Phil. "Come on, Phil," I urged. "She must have shared more than that. What happened? Clearly something went wrong. Did he misuse her?" Phil and Terry exchanged surprised glances, taken aback by the intensity of my anger. Summoning my strength, I redirected the conversation. I inquired about Connie's well-being after the delivery of the divorce papers. Terry affirmed this, describing Connie's emotional turbulence and the new outburst triggered by the documents. Connie's state of confusion and imbalance deeply affected her, intensifying my anger and fear for what traumatic events she might be withholding. Expressing my frustration, I asserted, "Well, she brought this upon herself. If she's hurting now, then so be it." Terry and Phil, taken aback by my intense anger, attempted to reason with me. Terry, with a cracking voice, urged me to consider reconciliation, emphasizing the severity of divorce and suggesting that I talk to Connie first. As I listened to Terry's plea, my anger began to wane, replaced by conflicting emotions. The decision ahead demanded careful consideration and open communication. Recognizing Terry's sincere concern as that of a true friend, I admitted to liking her despite their involvement. Terry's words compelled a serious approach. Deep down, I acknowledged that facing Connie was inevitable. Taking a deep breath, I decided, "All right, Terry, I will talk to her, but only after her belongings are removed from our house. It will be just her and me. I'll call her and provide details about when and where this conversation will take place. How does that sound?" Terry, overwhelmed with emotion, hugged me tightly, and I noticed Phil's confused and regretful expression. Expressing gratitude to Terry for her understanding, I assured her, "Thank you, Terry. I will contact her soon. Please ask her to wait for my call, and don't worry, I won't leave her in limbo for long." Phil, conveying regret, muttered sympathetically, "Sal, I'm sorry. My brother certainly deserved a good thrashing from you. I wouldn't blame you if you did." Observing Terry and Phil leave from the window, their hurried departure indicated their destination, my soon-to-be ex-wife. Lost in thought, I contemplated Terry's words, realizing there was some truth in them. It was time to talk to Connie, and this conversation could no longer be postponed. Feeling detached from the current situation, I sought solace in a conversation with my longtime friend Sadie. Our discussion lasted for half an hour, during which I attentively listened as Sadie shared details of her successful life without my presence. She truly was an extraordinary woman. When she touched on Connie's topic, her tone changed to that of a concerned mother. It felt like listening to my own mother's lectures. In the end, Sadie insisted I have dinner at her house tonight with her husband. Feeling somewhat obligated, I reluctantly agreed to her request. The rest of the day involved various changes. Locks were replaced, rooms were rearranged, clothes were packed or discarded, and photos were reorganized or destroyed. Each action symbolized moving forward and parting with the past. As evening approached, I found myself lost in thought, gazing out of the window and contemplating the task that lay ahead. Understanding the need to gather my strength for what awaited, I decided to postpone making the call until the morning. Feeling a sense of weariness, another restless night followed, offering no relief from the weight of anxious thoughts. In the early morning, just before 7:30, an unexpected call disrupted the silence. Phil's voice came through, delivering news about Tony's condition. Apparently, Tony had been in the hospital for several days, injured but in stable condition. The news had a minimal effect on my emotions, and my response carried a cold detachment. I made it clear to Phil that I harbored no sympathy for Tony, stating, "I hope you don't expect sympathy from me, Phil." As far as I understand, he was lucky that our paths did not cross. I don't have the slightest desire to show him any respect. Phil seemed to accept the frankness of my words and acknowledge the justified anger I felt toward Tony. He refrained from asking certain questions, recognizing the depth of my emotions. Expressing remorse for not being as good a friend to me as I had been to him, Phil conveyed his understanding of the irreparable past. I reassured him that it was not his fault and expressed gratitude for informing me about Tony. After bidding farewell and expressing love to Terry, Phil concluded the call. Placing the phone back on the stand, I turned my attention to the view outside the window. Contemplating the garden, I enjoyed the silence and reflected on the unfolding events. A calm atmosphere enveloped me as I observed random birds flying to the feeder and feasting on the seeds I happily supplied them. Watching the serene communion with nature through the glass always brought me a sense of calm. It was at such moments, immersed in the beauty of the natural world, that my thoughts could flow freely. Dialing Carlo's number on my mobile phone, I shared the news about Tony. His response was brief, but filled with a sense of satisfaction. He noted that the work was done well. Setting the phone aside, I took a sip of the coffee in my hand, relishing the aromas of the day. Soon the phone rang again, disrupting the peaceful atmosphere. This time I decided to let the answering machine handle it. Listening carefully, I heard Connie's trembling voice leaving a message, filled with uncertainty and emotion. "I'm sorry, but I have to explain. I need you. I need to get home. I'm so sorry." Connie's desperate plea echoed in the voicemail. Sobs interrupted her words, penetrating my soul and making my heart ache in my chest. Each tearful phrase caused a shockwave of emotions, leaving me breathless. When the message ended, I found myself breathing heavily, contradictory thoughts spinning in my head. I knew that today I would have to solve this situation, but I wanted her to wait so that she would understand that my decision was made not only in response to her message, it had to be a carefully thought-out decision. For the next few hours, I wandered aimlessly around the house, lost in deep thought. The once familiar rooms now seemed empty, emphasizing the void that had formed after Connie's absence. In place of her belongings, there were spaces that served as visual reminders of our life together. I contacted Sadie and asked for help from several people with a van to move all of Connie's things. Within an hour, the boxes and bags I packed were neatly loaded into the back of the van. I watched the car pull away, setting off to return Connie's things. Soon, I was expecting my phone to buzz with a notification about the delivery of her belongings. This marked the final completion of the one-way trip, the final stage of our life together. Terry called to inform me about the delivery of Connie's belongings. I expressed brief gratitude for the organization, feeling a sense of completeness. Terry updated me, mentioning that they stored most items in the warehouse, keeping only the ones I had marked as personal. Asked whether I would talk to Connie, I firmly instructed Terry to call her as I awaited Connie's response. My tone remained controlled but firm when I spoke to her. I interrupted her attempt to apologize, stating, "Leave it alone, Connie. Now you have answers to questions you never asked. Yourself, when you were busy with other things. Despite her desperate pleas, I made it clear that we had nothing more to discuss. Firmly, I stated, "This is where our journey ends. Do you really think you can tell me anything to help me deal with this?" Connie continued to plead, asking to come home and talk. Prepared to listen, though unable to promise anything, I responded with fatigue in my voice. "I'll listen, but I can't promise anything." I concluded the conversation, carrying the weight of her words in my memory. Her voice held pain, and I wondered if she could sense the suffering in mine. Leaning back in my chair, I reflected on our marriage and the happiness I thought we shared. Doubt crept in, questioning how well I knew her and whether my assumptions about our relationship were too idealistic. Delving into introspection, I realized I might still have a lot to learn about the person I thought I knew closely. Although I didn't suspect anything until that fateful night, it dawned on me that Connie might have engaged in similar behavior before. Taking a deep breath, I decided to approach the upcoming meeting with restrained emotion, mentally preparing for what might be the last act of our marriage. The doorbell announced Connie's arrival, and nervously, I opened the door. Time seemed to stop. It was our first meeting after that solemn night at the hotel, and the shock resonated within me as she entered the living room. A thin sigh escaped her lips, replaced by a strangled sob. She noticed the empty spaces on the walls, devoid of photos and cherished souvenirs that once adorned our life together. Standing in front of me, covering her mouth with her hand, tears welled in her eyes. I stated coldly, bitterness in my voice, "Everything is gone." Pointing out the emptiness throughout the house, Connie expressed confusion. I reiterated that I never wanted this to happen. She pleaded, her voice shaking with remorse. I acknowledged that her actions had consequences, the result of her infidelity, extramarital affair, and connection with another man. In the ensuing silence, Connie sat down on the sofa. With a stern expression, I pressed her to speak. She apologized, expressing regret and admitting her inability to resist, describing it as independency. Struggling with emotions, I wondered if there was still room in my heart for forgiveness. I then revealed that I had talked to Terry and Phil, gaining a fuller understanding of what happened, and expressing frustration with the lack of clarity on why it happened. She shifted uncomfortably, looking down at her feet, admitting that she couldn't answer why she got involved with a new and exciting person. I argued about the undeniable fact that she slept with him, consistently expressing my resentment and disappointment over the course of several weeks. Connie, laden with guilt, acknowledged that she messed up and expressed a desire to find a way to move past it. Changing the topic, I inquired about the whereabouts of the person she was involved with. Connie denied referring to him as her lover, explaining that she went on dates with him but emphasizing her love for me and apologizing tearfully for her terrible mistake. Listening to her plea, anger boiled inside me as I questioned her sincerity and trustworthiness. I pointed out her deceitful actions and questioned why I should believe anything she said. Connie, recognizing the extent of my pain and betrayal, continued crying, realizing the precarious state of our relationship. Demanding to know if I had communicated with my counterpart, I harshly questioned her, waiting for her answer. She tearfully revealed that she hadn't heard anything about him and expressed her reluctance to know more, considering him the one who ruined her life. Noticing the missing wedding photo, Connie walked around the room, observing the void left by the absence of memories. Emotionally drained, she sank onto the sofa, acknowledging the irreversible loss. The silence between us reflected the vast gap created by her actions. Pleading for a chance and expressing a note of defeat but hope in her eyes, Connie asked if there was really no chance for reconciliation. Taking a deep breath, I met her gaze, conveying a mix of suffering and resilience. Declaring that her betrayal shattered my heart and constituted disrespect for our feelings and those of our friends, I asserted that our marriage was over. I left her to face the consequences of her choices, urging her to sign the divorce papers and leave. Expressing finality and fatigue, I stated that everything ended with her, instructing her to leave my house in the city for peace. Sitting dejectedly, Connie absorbed my words and slowly stood to leave. I followed her to the door, watching as she opened her car door. When she looked back and apologized, mixed emotions stirred in me. Closing the door, I sealed not only her exit but also the end of our marriage. 2 days later, Carlo informed me that Connie had left the country, escorted by his people. Realizing she wouldn't find peace in the city, I felt a sense of closure. I exposed my wife's cheating with video evidence, and now our kids want nothing to do with her. In emergencies, you have to act fast. When someone has cardiac arrest, you perform chest compressions to keep their brain oxygenated until help arrives to defibrillate their heart and restore its rhythm. You stop the bleeding before worrying about a broken bone. I sat on the patio, clueless about what to do first. This was a new situation for me, and I felt blindsided. As a critical care nurse, I honed my observation skills. I could spot subtle signs of a patient's decline and act swiftly, often saving lives. Yet, I missed the warning signs of my nearly 18-year marriage's demise. I had no intention of saving it. I wanted to end it painfully. After reconsidering, I didn't want innocent parties hurt when I targeted my cheating wife and her lover. I took a sip of beer and thought about my options. Looking around my backyard, the lawn stretched from the patio to the bayou with only a few trees. My house, a traditional-style home with modern amenities, was a gift from my father and grandfather when I got engaged. The land had been in my family for generations, and the house was built by my family's construction company. I chose nursing over joining the business, despite my father's initial disappointment. I could afford some luxuries like a boat and fishing gear, and took my family on vacations when I could. Family was my priority, and now their happiness was at risk. Looking around, I saw my sister's identical house next door. I called her over. We needed to talk. "Isn't it early for a drink, Rob? It's only 2 p.m., she said, noticing my beer. "I'm off for the weekend, in the mood," I replied. She knew my work schedule allowed for frequent time off. I preferred having a cooler of beer nearby to avoid trips to the fridge. Offering her a drink, she sat down. "So what's so urgent?" Susan asked. "You told me not to call anyone before talking to you." "I found out Bonnie is cheating on me," I said, my voice shaking. "Are you sure? Maybe it's a cruel joke," she asked. I nodded. There was a video attached, no doubt who sent it. "I don't know," I replied. The email said, "You should know your wife is cheating. Here's proof." The sender was pissed off. 999. Susan was furious. "That cheating cow. Doesn't she know you'll destroy her and her lover? Do you know who the guy is?" I nodded, ready to respond, but she cut me off. "If Rich ever cheated on me, I'd destroy him." "How does Bonnie even find time to have an affair? She's home almost every night, except for bachelorette parties where I'm always present. She works with Rich and they usually drive together. He would notice if she was having fun." Susan paused, noticing my shocked expression. "No way," she exclaimed. "She's cheating with my husband. They're cheating on us with each other." Her face turned red and tears welled up. "I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you gently," I said, hugging her. "I've had a couple of hours to calm down, enough not to grab a weapon." She cried briefly, then composed herself. "You okay? What do we do? Wait for them and then confront them?" she asked. "I love him, but I'm not tolerating this. We need to be smart," I said. "Act normal tonight, just like yesterday. We'll greet them with a kiss." Susan frowned. "Are you serious? We need a plan. We'll get legal advice tomorrow. At least we know we haven't contracted any STDs, I added with a smirk to lighten the mood. Susan pointed at me. "Hell no, I didn't even consider that. You know me, I might joke about becoming a TV star, but I'd never actually do it." She finished her beer and tossed the can. I handed her another and, "Just for the record, I'm not doing anything with Rich. I just got my period." She laughed. "This will last until we confront those cheaters. He's not getting anything from me. Bonnie can have him, and we mustn't let the kids know yet," I warned. They left for Mom and Dad's place this morning. They took their time, but didn't argue or ask questions. They just got in Jason's car and drove off. The kids, my son Jason 17, Rob 16, Dave and Cindy 16, and my daughter Deary 16, spent the entire summer together. They were more like siblings than cousins, especially during the pandemic when they were always together. Rich had been a good father and uncle, involved in the kids' education and activities. I handled the outdoor fun, teaching them camping, fishing, and hunting. We'd camp in the backyard, then gradually venture deeper into the swamp as the kids grew. They'd join in fishing trips, often with Rich or Susan driving the second boat. Recently, Rich let his sons handle his boat while he stayed home. The kids learned to be self-reliant, finding their own food on trips and working together as a team. They were tough and valued family and teamwork. 3 weeks ago, I rearranged my work schedule to get 6 days off in a row. I took the girls in one boat, and the boys went in another. We traveled slowly to avoid snags in shallow water, stopping occasionally so everyone could take turns driving. We spent a week at the old Pooh fish camp, fishing and catching crabs. We bonded as a family, or so I thought. Apparently, Bonnie and Rich didn't value family unity. The thought of telling the kids about Bonnie and Rich's affair was heartbreaking. Family was everything to me, and destroying that unity would be unforgivable. I expressed this to Susan. "We can't hide it from them," she said, "but we can delay it a bit. I'll make sure they don't know anything is wrong. What do we do next?" "I can't forgive or forget infidelity, no matter what Bonnie says," I replied. Susan agreed. "I can tolerate a lot, but not cheating. I need to figure out how to get rid of her without losing everything. I won't risk jail or let her take the kids. I can't hurt Rich either. I have to be there for the kids." I opened another beer. "I get it. We need to break him. Financially. I'm going to take every penny I can get. Child support, alimony, everything," I agreed. Rich earned more, so Susan had a better chance. Bonnie could drive me to the pen, as courts often favor women in divorce cases. In my job, I handle trusts and wills, but I know enough about the law to say our assets are protected. Our houses are safe. Dad gave them to us before we married, so Bonnie and Rich can't claim them. Bonnie might try to stay in your house until the kids are grown, but she can't claim it. Didn't you and Bonnie sign a prenup? Dad insisted. It said if either party cheated, they'd only get 20% of joint assets and no alimony. Bonnie's father, a wealthy plastic surgeon, had insisted on the prenup. He wasn't thrilled when I got his daughter pregnant, fearing I'd take half his fortune. My father also made Susan and Rich sign a similar agreement. I'm worried about that video of Rich and Bonnie, Susan said. Who filmed it and how? There were at least 3 cameras, I said. The video I got showed the same event from different angles, suggesting it wasn't edited. Yet neither Rich nor Bonnie seemed to know they were being recorded. Susan insisted I show her the video on my tablet. Holy crap, she exclaimed. Rich and Bonnie's comments in the video about how Susan and I were clueless infuriated her. Rich is done, but we need to find out who made the video. I don't want it coming back to haunt us. I don't care if the world sees it, as long as it doesn't affect us, I agreed, suggesting we hold off on a public reaction. Susan sat silently, pondering our next steps, then began to sob. I hugged her, and we both cried, unable to hide our pain anymore. That night, I met Bonnie at the door, hugging and kissing her. I half expected her to pull away, but she kissed me back. I couldn't detect any trace of aftershave, just her perfume. Despite my anger, I told her dinner was ready. Susan and I had already planned takeout, neither of us wanting to cook. We joked about poisoning our spouses, but it was a way to vent, not a real option. The next morning, I watched Bonnie get into Rich's car. I called Susan. How'd it go? No problem, she replied. Joking and planning helped me keep my cool. Any idea where they're going tonight? Susan, always a bit of a loose cannon, needed to vent. We had to be honest about our feelings. At 10 a.m., we were in the office of one of Susan's bosses, Jake, a divorce attorney and an old friend. He agreed to represent us. Are you sure you have a video showing both parties? He asked. We assured him we did, but chose not to show it yet. As long as you have evidence of infidelity, you're good. Your prenuptial agreements are strict. Rob, did you consult a lawyer before signing?
I explained that my father insisted on a legal opinion,
and Susan used the same document. Jake continued, the cheater only gets 20% of joint assets, including savings and investments. There are no provisions for personal income, accounts. Do either of you have any hidden income? We shook our heads. What if Bonnie has money she didn't tell me about? I asked. Common property, Jake replied. Like if you bought something without telling her. Home improvements can be tricky. Your homes are protected because they were gifted before marriage, but things like solar panels might be considered common property. So she only gets 20% because she's a cheater, right? I asked. I'm willing to give her that. We can negotiate the division of furniture and other items. She'll have to pay for transportation and storage if she wants to take anything. Jake grinned. These are the games we'll play. The important thing is your ironclad prenups. As long as you prove infidelity, keep the video copies hidden and confidential. If they sue over the video being public, it depends on how it was obtained. Be careful. He emphasized the need for discretion. Susan and I nodded. We had considered editing the video and sharing it with our friends and family, but we were worried about the impact on our children. Now we were more determined to find out who filmed it. We decided to serve the divorce papers on Thursday at noon, but I suggested waiting until Friday afternoon so they would have to worry all weekend without legal advice. Jake convinced us to stick with Thursday, saying it would save costs and still keep them busy with financial statements all weekend, likely increasing their legal fees. Initially, we wanted to serve them in person to watch their reactions, but Jake advised against it. Instead, we decided to serve them at work in front of their colleagues. After leaving Jake's office, we went to the bank to transfer money into new accounts in our names only, ensuring we had statements for all accounts. We paid off and canceled credit cards, opening new ones in our names only. I checked my email and found 3 more videos of Bonnie and Rich. I thanked the sender and asked how they got the videos, expressing concern about them going public. Public. I secretly wished they would be released, but knew we had to be cautious to avoid a lawsuit. An hour later, I received an email with an address, 9203 Victoria Street, apartment 2011. I visited the address and convinced the woman at the counter to give me information by implying the tenant was involved in criminal activities. She gave me the details. The apartment was rented by the insurance company where Rich and Bonnie worked, with Rich's signature on the contract. I wondered how the company would react if they found out they were paying for Rich's affair. Bonnie called me at 12:30, furious about the divorce papers. I calmly told her I knew she had found someone else and was setting her free. We had rehearsed our responses. Bonnie angrily denied the affair, accusing me of believing rumors and threatening to take everything in the divorce, including custody of the kids, child support, and half of our assets. She suggested Rich could move in with her, and I could live with Susan. Imagining what they were doing in my house. Go ahead, I said. Get yourself a lawyer. I barely kept my voice steady, struggling with the regret of my marriage falling apart and anger at her stubborn denial. I hope Susan hadn't revealed too much to Rich. By the way, the girls are packing your things. Susan told the boys to pack Rich's. Everything will be in front of the house for you to pick up this afternoon. We got a restraining order and changed the locks this morning. You'll have to find another place to stay until the court decides. Bonnie started yelling, so I hung up. 10 minutes later, Susan texted, "Backyard, bring your cooler, make sure it's full." "That fool, Rich," she began, sipping her beer. He tried to blame it on some secretary's gossip. I told him Bonnie did the same. He denied everything, said we shouldn't believe it. I told him to get his stuff. Really? Yes. I told him to call first because I had a loaded weapon. Jake will be here soon with 2 sheriff's deputies to keep things from getting out of hand. I realized having deputies present was smart. Rich might provoke me and I could end up in jail for assault. I was already in a controlled panic mode like during emergencies. Susan continued, "I'm glad you talked to the kids earlier. I couldn't have done it without breaking down. We gathered the kids and I told them what was happening. Surprisingly, they seemed to expect it and started packing Bonnie and Rich's stuff." Susan said, "The kids took it surprisingly well. Maybe they're in shock or don't realize how it will affect them." My phone beeped with an email. "I wonder if it's from Pissed Off 999, I said. "Check it," Susan insisted. She showed me how to open it, and we listened to an audio file. "Can you believe Robert and Susan served us?" Bonnie said. "They must have found out somehow." "I can't believe this. Just last night, Robert was so affectionate," Rich replied. "Relax," Rich replied. "They don't know anything. Someone must have gossiped about us having lunch or driving together. We need to deny everything. If they go through with this divorce, we'll make them pay. I know a lawyer who will help us. Just don't admit anything. Act like everything you say is being recorded." After listening, Susan and I were silent. "Okay, let them think we don't know anything," I said. "Rich mentioned they've been planning something for a long time. We need to ensure we're protected if they do something illegal." Susan nodded, tears in her eyes. "We have to hold firm." "I know," Susan said quietly. "Jake said I'm in a better position. Courts favor women, but I can't accept Bonnie getting custody of Jason and Deary and living in your house until Deary turns 18, even with the prenup. It's terrible if she lives rent-free while you pay child support." I felt the same but hugged Susan as she cried. I assured her we would come out victorious, though I wasn't sure. Divorce is about minimizing losses. The children were silent as Susan and I entered the house. Deary, Dre, and Cindy were packing Bonnie's clothes into suitcases and bags, now using plastic garbage bags. I asked them to take pictures of the luggage, planning to apply its value to Bonnie's share of the assets. Next door, the boys were almost done. Rich had fewer clothes, and the boys were stuffing them into bags rather than folding them. I smiled as Rob stuffed a $2,000 suit into a bag. They had my back. Bonnie texted me, and I called Jake, who showed up with 2 sheriff's deputies. Jake told me to relax and enjoy. Bonnie and Rich arrived with another familiar face, Boudreaux Landry, a bully from elementary school. "Hey, Robert," Boudreaux smirked. "I hear you're having trouble with your wife and son-in-law. No big deal. If I had a weapon, I would have shot him." Boudreaux was huge, and fighting him wasn't an option. "Hey, Boudreaux," I said. "We're just trying to work it out." "You don't seriously think my boy Rich is with your wife, do you?" Boudreaux asked, grinning. "That's the story," I said. Jake moved closer. "I can't deal with it." Bonnie accused me of taking all the money from our bank account. "Yes, and I have statements showing the original amounts. You'll get what you're owed." She didn't know her credit card would no longer work. Susan and I didn't accompany Rich and Bonnie into the house. Deary, Dre, and Cindy followed Bonnie and a deputy, ensuring nothing funny happened. Jason and Rob followed Rich. "Where's my jewelry?" Bonnie asked. This was a major point of contention over the years. I bought her high-quality jewelry worth at least $25,000. Most of it was locked in my safe. I took pictures of Bonnie's ring and necklace for insurance purposes. I wanted proof of ownership. Boudreaux started to argue but stopped when I explained I took pictures to prevent the jewelry from going missing. Jake stepped in, suggesting a new appraisal of all assets. After consulting with Boudreaux, Bonnie calmly removed her jewelry and handed it to me. "Where am I supposed to go?" Bonnie asked. I nearly suggested her love nest on Victoria Street but held back. I shrugged, realizing my emotions had shifted. Days ago, I loved this woman. Now I felt nothing but anger and coldness toward her. Bonnie and Rich finally left with Boudreaux following. I wondered if they were heading to the apartment. Jake smiled. I hope so. We have someone following them. If we reveal the apartment now, it will help our negotiations. Instead, they went to the Holiday Inn near their office. Cheerfully, I helped them move their things inside. I needed more flash drives for backups of the audio and video files. Susan and the girls were making dinner when my phone beeped with another email. Susan followed me to the computer. Okay, guys, Bud's voice said. Someone's probably following Robert. Stay at a motel and get a room with 2 beds. Make sure both beds look used. The investigator can bribe the maid to check. We'll say, you're sharing a room to save money. It was embarrassing when my card was declined, Rich said. Good thing I took extra cash. What's next? I'll call the credit card company to open a new account. Robert's thought about jewelry, Boudreaux continued. He likely has a list. Protect any hidden assets legally. They're community property, but what Robert and Susan don't know about, they can't claim. Don't hide too much. You might get caught. If you have a secret bank account, make sure it holds only a small amount. Offshore accounts are better. You don't want to be caught lying under oath. Now what? Bonnie asked. They can find our Baton Rouge accounts. Screw that, Rich exclaimed. We'll fly to the Cayman Islands and open an account there. Make the room look used. Wet the tissues, ruffle the towels, wet the shower, and use some shampoo. I'll call the office and say we're off tomorrow. The audio file ended. Do they have secret bank accounts, Susan? I asked. Where did the money come from? I see the bank statements. He couldn't have hidden much. I felt bad too. Bonnie and I got $50 weekly for travel cash, and we both reviewed the credit card statements monthly. I told the apartment woman Rich was into pills and Corsican as a bluff, but now I wondered, could he be hiding something? We decided to leave it for tonight, joining the kids for dinner. There wasn't much we could do about hidden bank accounts anyway. The next morning, I drove to Jake's office, having arranged a jewelry appraisal and an estimate for my firearms from a local dealer. Susan went to work briefly, and we met at Jake's office, where I played the audio files from the previous day. I'd like to know who's sending these, Jake said. How they bugged Bonnie and Rich in the hotel is beyond me. A private investigator couldn't have done it that fast. We might need a judge's order to find their bank account balances, which could mean hiring an investigator. Susan and I shook our heads when asked if we had noticed missing money. If you want this divorce quickly, like you said, we'll move fast. Next week, we'll meet with Bonnie, Rich, and their lawyer to list assets, then go before a judge. Louisiana's Napoleonic laws make divorce easier, especially with proven infidelity. Counseling won't help. Once the judge rules, you'll wait 6 months and it's over, Jake added. Boudreaux called, demanding you release an extra 30% of the money you withdrew. I reminded him the prenup states the cheater only gets 20% of assets. He demanded proof of infidelity, which we'll present in court. It was amusing to see him flounder. I'd love to get an audio tape of him advising hiding money offshore into the courtroom. I had to work that weekend. The head nurse, Sharon, couldn't cover my shifts. What if I start coughing and need a COVID test? I asked. Idiot, Sharon said affectionately. Yes, I could fill in. You have vacation and sick days saved up. Take an emergency vacation if needed. I can't believe Bonnie did this to you. How about I work this weekend and start my vacation on Monday? I suggested. Really? Thank you. I owe you one, Sharon said. I'll start your sick leave and then vacation. Take as much as you need and keep me posted. Working was a welcome relief. Weekends were busy, but ICU staff had to stay alert. I was surprised to see my father-in-law, Dr. Pran, waiting for me at the nurse's station. Hello, Dr. Pran. What brings you to the ICU? I greeted him, knowing the staff would be curious. Cut the crap and let's talk, he hissed in the head nurse's office. He asked, what's this about you kicking Bonnie out? She called her mother sobbing. John, I found out Bonnie is having an affair, I said bluntly. She's cheating on me with my sister's husband. I'm dealing with a family crisis. It was a rumor started by gossipers at the office, said John. They commute together and often have lunch together. She told us the rumors about an affair with her boss were just that, rumors. I decided to be open with him despite our history. I haven't told anyone except my lawyer and my sister. I haven't even told Bonnie and Rich everything I know, let alone the kids, I said, holding back my emotions. I have proof, video, and audio files. This isn't just a rumor. Dr. Pran looked shocked. What are you going to do? He asked softly, already knowing the answer. What can I do? I replied. I'm trying to protect the kids, but I can't just ignore this. John, what would you do if Bonnie had proof I was cheating? I'd want your head on a platter. I'd help her bury you, he said honestly with tears in his eyes. What about Jason and Deary? How are they handling it? He asked. They're talking more with their cousins than with Susan or me. They seem to be holding up, but they're angry with Bonnie. I told them they need to talk to her, but I don't know if they have. I'm not getting involved in this. I thought you were overreacting to gossip, JN, he said softly. My first priority is to protect Jason and Deary. I nodded. And I'll help Bonnie with her physical needs. I don't excuse her behavior, but if you have irrefutable proof, I accept it. Stay in touch. You're an honorable man. He walked out, shoulders slumped. I felt more sorry for him than for Bonnie. Wow, Susan said when I got home. So he knows his daughter isn't so virtuous. We need to tell Mom and Dad soon. How about tomorrow night after your shift? We don't want them to be mad at us for keeping them in the dark. I agreed. The meeting wasn't pleasant. My father only asked if I had proof, and I assured him I did. Like John, he was more concerned about the kids than us, which I understood. In our culture, children came first, and adults dealt with the consequences of their actions. Children were protected but informed to learn. I received no additional information from my mysterious benefactor, which was fine. I had 4 explicit videotapes showing Bonnie and Rich, along with audio recordings proving their long-term affair. I didn't need more proof. Bonnie not only cheated but also financially defrauded the family. The mystery of how she saved enough to fly to the Cayman Islands infuriated me. She was a thief and a fraud. Jake began investigating their accounts using social security numbers, ensuring we could subpoena statements if the money was missing. Some questions were answered the following Wednesday when we met to list our total assets. A court-appointed financial arbitrator reviewed the paperwork. I provided my annual salary and Bonnie's pay stub. Bonnie made $5,000 a month, and my salary varied with overtime, but we earned similar amounts annually. Jake said this would allow for minimal alimony, even without the prenup and infidelity proof. On Monday, the auditor requested income tax returns for the past few years. I found them in our desk while Susan had to get copies from her accountant. She was upset that Rich hadn't filed them with other documents. She knew Rich earned about $80,000 compared to her $50,000, and was pleased when Jake said she'd likely get a sizable maintenance payment. Boudreaux entered the conference room with a sullen Rich and Bonnie. Bonnie glared at me, her anger surprising me. I expected an apology, but she remained silent, likely on Bud's advice. Rich struggled to maintain a neutral expression. The court officer introduced himself and his assistant, who took notes and kept an electronic record. Let's get started. Your attorneys have forms for you to sign, confirming that your statements today are true and may be admitted into evidence. Our goal is to compile a list of all assets and income for the judge to review. We won't discuss prenuptial agreements today. Regarding car valuation, we'll use the standard blue book. If the car your child drives is registered in your name, we can consider it separate from community property. If both parties agree, we'll get to the money later. Let's start with Mr. and Mrs. Fontano, listing automobiles. Firearms, the boat, and household goods took only a few minutes. Even Bonnie's jewelry wasn't a problem. I had it appraised, and its value exceeded that of my truck and firearms combined. Boudreaux insisted the solar system be considered separately and prepared a document stating its value and depreciation. Jake reviewed it, made a few notes, and nodded. The 401k accounts were listed. I asked why, thinking they should be excluded. No, they count since you've been married over 10 years, but in your case the values are similar, so it's not a big issue, replied Jake. We then reviewed the checking and savings accounts. Jake entered the statements, showing I had taken 80% of the funds, and did the same for Susan and Rich. It's straightforward, said the auditor, Mr. Jacobs. There's a big discrepancy between Mrs. Fontano's salary estimate and her tax returns for the last 2 years. Rich tensed up. I've estimated each of you earned $600. I explained. I multiplied her monthly salary by 12. Yes, but for the last 2 years, Mrs. Fontano reported an income of $140,000 annually. My incredulous "what the hell" made the assistant frown. Didn't you look at your tax returns? He asked. I shook my head and explained that Bonnie and Rich had a new accountant handle our taxes electronically. I just looked at the small refund we got. Bonnie turned purple. Her salary includes $80,000 in bonuses each year, Mr. Jacobs said. I looked at Boudreaux, and Mr. Jenkins got $110,000 in bonuses each year, Jacobs continued. Susan asked, how much extra was that net? About $80,000 a year, totaling about $160,000. So where's the money, Bonnie? I demanded. Is that why you went to the Cayman Islands last Friday to hide it? Bonnie angrily asked, how did you find out? Are you following me? She then composed herself. No, I didn't need to, I said. You did it yourself. Both you and Susan insisted the kids install phone locator apps. Jason and Deary used it to track you when you didn't answer them on Friday. They saw you reappear near the coast, suggesting you were in the Caymans. Bonnie and Rich looked astonished. They checked your office on Monday and saw you weren't home but in Baton Rouge, likely transferring money into new accounts, I added. Jake spoke up. Boudreaux, we can get statements to prove those account balances. It's illegal to hide money offshore to avoid distributing joint assets. Your clients flew to the Cayman right after hiring you. Hiding assets like this is a felony." Bonnie began to cry, and even Rich looked scared. Boudreaux's face turned pale and then red. "I didn't do anything like that," he declared, looking at the recorder and Jacob's assistant typing away. Susan asked Jake, "Can we get them to return the money?" Jake nodded. "Yes, we'd get our share in the end, even if we have to confiscate their paychecks. 80% of those accounts will become yours once infidelity is proven in court." "But there's no money left," exclaimed Bonnie. "It disappeared when we tried to transfer it." Rich tried to silence her, but she continued. "I think you stole it," she accused me. I looked at her incredulously. "I didn't know for sure about the money until recently. I suspected it, but I had no idea of the amounts. What are you claiming now? Did you spend it all or lose it?" "Both are nonsense." She explained that they tried to transfer the money electronically at the bank in Grand Cayman, but the transfer was denied. They then went to Baton Rouge to investigate. The online statement showed the transfer, but no routing number or account details. "Provide me with the bank information for the Baton Rouge account, and I will investigate," said Mr. Jacobs. "Or I can get the results faster and enter them into the court documents." Rich and Bonnie left the room looking dejected. Susan wondered where the money went, and I shrugged, sharing her thoughts. Our case was expedited, likely because Bonnie and Rich had begged Boudreaux to speed things up. They stayed at the Holiday Inn for a week before moving to the apartment on Victoria Street. It amused me to think about them in their love nest, likely struggling with cash flow and Boudreaux's fees. All 5 children insisted on attending the hearing, and I agreed since they were affected by the divorce. Jake explained what to expect. Judge Goody conducted his hearing semi-formally, sitting at the table with us. Jake, Susan, and I sat to Boudreaux's left, with Rich and Bonnie across from us. The kids sat in the gallery. Following Jake's lead, we stood as the judge entered. He waved for us to sit. "I handle family cases in a semi-formal setting," he explained. "Sit and speak when I address you. Raise your hand if you want to speak. Be on your best behavior and respectful. If you piss me off, I'll throw you out. Understood?" The kids managed to hold back their laughter at his last statement. "Well, I've reviewed both cases. Normally we treat these as separate matters, but the evidence and parties involved are the same here. A sibling is accused of infidelity in Louisiana. While infidelity alone isn't grounds for divorce, there are prenuptial agreements that affect property distribution in such cases. Therefore, I'll need irrefutable evidence of infidelity first. There were discrepancies regarding monetary assets, with allegations of hiding funds. My investigation shows Mrs. Fontano and Mr. Jenkins have bank accounts in Baton Rouge with balances of $120,000 and $160,000 respectively. The entire balance was transferred from these accounts the Monday before the divorce petition was filed. The correct passwords and security questions were used, indicating the transfers were made by Mrs. Fontano and Mr. Jenkins, or someone they authorized. Further investigation revealed the money was split evenly among 5 accounts belonging to their children: Jason and Deary Fontano and Robert, Dave, and Cynthia Jenkins. These transfers are legal under the Uniform Gifts to Minors Act. The accounts were set up years ago, likely for college or income in the event of a parent's passing. I was stunned. Why was Bonnie making such a fuss if she had given the money to her children? The judge continued. The parents showed responsibility, if not remorse, by giving the money to their children. Such deposits are non-refundable unless fraud is proven. Does anyone have proof of fraud? I was thrilled. While I would have liked knowing the money was divided among the children was satisfying. Rich and Bonnie looked shocked, suspecting we had outsmarted them. When Judge Goody asked if we had proof of fraud, we all shook our heads and said no, Your Honor. They seemed terrified of possible charges for hiding money overseas. None of them appeared willing to rebut the judge's remarks. The next matter is the establishment of custody of the minor children, the judge said. My daughter Deary raised her hand. Yes, Your Honor, I read that. Children 15 and older can choose which parent to live with, she said. In some states, yes. In Louisiana, I consider the children's opinions after speaking to them privately, Judge Goody replied. Deary stood and stated, I don't need to talk privately. My mother cheated on my father and our entire family. I want to live with my dad. Jason stood up and agreed. Robert, Dave, and Cindy also stood, stating they wanted to live with their mother for the same reason. My heart raced under the table as I squeezed Susan's hand. I will consider your wishes, Judge Goody said with a half smile, but it hasn't yet been established that there was, as you put it, treason. Deary raised her hand again, and the judge turned to her. I also read that a 16-year-old can petition the court for emancipation, and 17-year-olds can leave home without a petition. Yes, the judge replied. The The 17-year-old rule is an old law for young men wanting to enlist in the military without parental consent. For a 16-year-old to petition for emancipation, they must be able to support themselves. Is that clear? Deary nodded. I have a college fund with another $56,000 added to it, plus what my parents and grandparents contributed. Cindy stood up. Me too. Collectively, we have plenty of money to live on our own for a long time. Her brother Dave stood and smiled. Me too. We could rent a nice place together. Jason and Rob stood up and said that if they pulled their money, all five could live fine on their own. I glanced at the judge, who seemed to suppress a laugh. Let me guess, if I don't go along with your wishes, you'll all petition for emancipation or leave on your own. The five heads nodded. Sit down, he commanded. I'll consider what you said. There's an allegation of infidelity in this case which affects the prenuptial agreement and property distribution, so I'm going to ask for evidence of infidelity. Jake stood up. Your Honor, I have these pictures of Richard Jenkins and Bonnie Fontano together. Boudreaux objected. Anyone can alter photos. I have a picture of me shaking hands with the president and other of us playing golf made by my son. It's a joke. Defense counsel hasn't identified the source of this evidence. Judge Goody looked at Jake, then at Susan and me. Jake nodded for me to respond. Your Honor, the evidence came from an anonymous source. I received several video and audio files and took these screenshots from one of the videos. I have the full video on a DVD and thumb drive. I looked at Rich and Bonnie, who appeared shocked and agitated, shaking their heads in disbelief. Judge Goody observed their reactions, noting their purple faces in clear distress. Okay, do I need to reproduce the file Mr. Fontano provided, or do all parties agree that infidelity occurred? Judge Goody asked. Boudreaux wanted to see the footage, but when Bonnie and Rich quickly pleaded with the judge not to show the video, he backtracked. Could you spare a minute for my clients, Your Honor? After consulting with them, he reluctantly said, We agree with the plaintiff's claims. Well, in that case, I will announce my verdict, said Judge Goody. Since all parties agree infidelity occurred, the marriage contracts will be honored in each case. Susan and I were awarded 80% of the community property. Judge Goody suggested we discuss the actual distribution with our attorneys to avoid court involvement in the details. For custodial parents, I grant Robert Fontano full custody of Jason and Deary Fontano, and Susan Jenkins custody of Cynthia, Robert, and David Jenkins, as requested. The non-custodial parents have full visitation rights. Legally, the divorce will be finalized in 6 months. The increased incomes require Bonnie to pay me $1,000 a month and Rich to pay Susan $2,000 a month for the next 3 years. Each dependent child will receive $500 a month until they turn 18. Jake said the payments were minimal and suggested we could appeal, but I decided against it, and Susan followed my lead. After the judge ended the hearing, we left. Jake said he would arrange a meeting to work out property distribution details. I told the kids to go home, change, and wait for me for a family meeting. Susan and I walked to the back of the courtroom where my father was waiting. So when did you figure it out, Dad? I asked. Susan looked puzzled. It hit me when Deary and Cindy made those comments about the video, I said to Susan. Pissed off 999 is a personality the kids invented. Susan's mouth dropped open. No, Dad said. I figured it out a few days ago when I saw an old credit card bill. Jason and Rob asked me 2 months ago for a credit card to plan something special for your anniversary. They promised to reimburse me about $500. The statement showed a purchase from an electronics company. Initially, I didn't pay attention, but when I called the company, they revealed the kids bought cell phone bugs. The kids spent $500 on spy devices. I asked yes. Apparently, they were expensive. Dad didn't know where they got the video cameras. He followed me home to find out more. All 5 children were waiting in the living room. They fell silent as we walked in. Go to the kitchen and sit down, I said. Susan grabbed 3 beers, handing one to Dad and me. Jason and Rob held out their hands, grinning. You may be old enough to be spies, but not old enough to drink, I said. They shrugged, knowing I wasn't angry. Okay, who wants to start? Let's begin at the beginning, Deary began. It all started when Cindy and I stopped by my mom's office, and she wasn't there. Neither was Uncle Rich. This was around the time they began Phase 2 of the COVID lockdown. We thought we could get some money from one of them to see a movie. The receptionist said they were out and had left long ago. It was well past lunchtime, so we decided to track them. You know, we have a locator feature my mom insisted on installing on our phones. It showed they were at a strange address, so we checked it out. It was an apartment building. When we arrived, we saw Uncle Rich's car and waited. They came out later, walking hand in hand and smiling. That got us thinking. So, we started tracking where they went over the next few days. For 3 days straight, they returned to the same place and stayed for about an hour and a half each time. Sometimes they went there late at night after work, but before going home, we told the boys about it. Rob continued. We searched the internet and found bugs you can insert into cell phones. After downloading an app, it works like a continuous phone call in the background and doesn't interfere with regular calls. It does drain the battery a bit faster. It transmits all the sounds around the phone so you can eavesdrop. We talked Pop into letting us use his credit card to buy them. Sorry we lied a bit, pal. Installing the bugs in the app on their phones was easy. We took turns checking them and eavesdropping on conversations. We recorded anything interesting to share later. So that's clear with the audio recordings, but how did you get the video and find out which apartment they used? I asked. We looked at their keys. They both had a key marked 2011 feet. That's not their office number, so Jason copied his mom's key. We went into the apartment a couple of times and looked around. We decided we needed cameras, Deary explained. So we bought a few and a small transmitter, added Dave. That was pretty cool. The boy was excited about the technology. He didn't notice he was describing the end of several marriages and the breakup of 2 families. At least Susan and I got some answers. The cameras were motion sensitive, so they didn't burn too many batteries. We hid the receiver under the couch. The receiver got information from the cameras and transmitted it to our receiver. We recorded it. It seemed simple. So, you took a video of Bonnie and Rich doing it? You also recorded audio files and sent some to me? I spoke carefully. These were my kids, my nephews, and nieces. I couldn't ruin my relationship with them, but there was another issue: money. Dad, when Cindy and I first looked at that apartment, I realized our mom was gone, Deary stated. Well, not gone, but not back to where our family used to be. They had clothes stashed away, and Mom had some outfits I recognized. She had a makeup kit, towels, and washcloths too. We knew what they were doing. They'd work out, clean up, and then come home to you and Aunt Sue like nothing had happened. We were all furious. They weren't just cheating you and Aunt Sue, they were cheating us. Now about the money, the secret bank accounts were a side issue, Cindy said. When we looked around the apartment, we found some bank account papers. There were instructions on how to access it online. It took a while to find the actual accounts. We even spent time in Dad and Aunt Bonnie's offices, peeking in on them a couple of times. The receptionist let us in to wait for them. She giggled. We looked through a bunch of folders and finally found one in the bottom drawer of Dad's desk with some applications. Then we looked in Aunt Bonnie's office and found more papers. Aunt Bonnie had a small notebook in her purse with passwords and stuff in it. It didn't say secret bank account, but we could tell the password was unusual, much more so than the one she uses for her cell phone, and it worked. It took a while, but eventually we realized it was the right password. They were using the same password for both accounts. Jason took control of the situation. We already knew they were up to something shady. When we discovered their hidden bank accounts, we got really angry. We wondered if they were dealing pills or embezzling money. Dave was the one who came up with the idea of putting money in our accounts. Dave blushed. Actually, he said, we can't let Dad and Aunt Bonnie get rich and leave us hanging. We read about dividing assets in a divorce, and we didn't like the idea of them keeping half the money either. We had accounts set up by Powwow, and I thought maybe we should take all the money. I thought the cops might catch us, but since we were minors and it was our parents' money, we wouldn't get in serious trouble. We thought it might work, so we did it. If we'd known about the 80 to 20% share, we probably wouldn't have taken it, Deary said regretfully. It actually worked out better that way. And then you guys started sending me video and audio files? I said, looking around the table. I was at least a little relieved to see an expression of restraint rather than outright pride. That was the hardest part, Jason said quietly. We were really mad at Mom and Uncle Rich for what they were doing to all of us. We didn't want to hurt you and Aunt Sue, but we couldn't do anything, so we sent you that first video. We kept trying to get you to visit Mom and Dad. We knew you were upset. If you pulled a weapon out of the safe, we would have told you everything we knew. You'd tell Aunt Sue. We kind of moved on. We already moved the money that Mom hid. I think we stole it. Well, I know we stole it, but we figured they cheated us, so it was only fair. I hope you and Aunt Sue weren't too upset. I looked at Susan, who had a look of amazement on her face from the start. I hope you kids never get mad at me and Sue, I said with a smile. But if you ever nail me like you did your mother and Rich, I'll punch you. The loss of life, even if it's with my walker in a nursing home. They all chuckled at my threat. You'll never have to worry about that, Daddy, said Deary. You'll never let the family down. We're Cajun. We stick together. One thing I don't understand, my dad said. You bought cell phone bugs with my credit card. They were awfully expensive. Where did you get the money for the video cameras from? Yeah, they cost about $500 for each camera because they shot full video with sound and had built-in motion and sound detectors. We got 5 of them, replied Jason. Plus another $500 each for a hidden transmitter that sent a signal to a receiver we hooked up to Deary's computer. That's a total of $3,500 plus shipping, but we can get half of that money back if we return it undamaged. We already pulled all the cameras and the transmitter. We probably lost the cell phone bugs, though. As for the credit card, we used Dad's Visa card. I didn't have a Visa card, I said. So we do now. I applied for it and forged your signature, said Jason. At least he was honest enough not to look guilty. It has a $10,000 limit. We bring in the mail every day, so hiding it was easy, added Deary. Cindy and I set up an email account, pissed off 999 feet. Rob came up with the name. He said what Mom and Uncle Rich did made him mad. The kids smiled and nodded, seeing that Susan, Dad, and I were really impressed. So, the bugs in the cell phones are still active? I asked. Dave nodded. Yes, they work as long as the cell phone batteries are charged. Thanks to that and the phone location app, we know where they are and what they are doing at all times, said Dave. He was thrilled when he realized they weren't in trouble. If one of them is talking on their cell phone, we can hear it. It's voice activated, so it's a lot of car sounds and business talk. We took turns going through the files to pick out anything important. I demanded access to the audio recording as a result. Susan and I had advanced knowledge of Bonnie and Rich's demands at the property division meeting. Bonnie was so eager to get her jewelry that she gave me most of the cash and all of the housewares. We granted some of their requests without much argument, but we made them grovel during the process. Susan shocked everyone except me when she suggested they walk across town with signs on their heads saying, "We cheated on our spouses." The alternative was to appeal the amount of alimony and child support. I thought Boudreaux's eyes would pop out of his head at that threat. We heard Boudreaux tell them they got off easy on the child support payments and warned them that Susan and I would likely appeal the amounts. Susan eventually recanted, forcing them both to apologize on their knees. I don't know exactly how it happened, and I'm willing to swear on a stack of Bibles that I had nothing to do with it. Somehow, 2 months after our hearing, the insurance company that Bonnie and Rich worked for found out that he had rented an apartment for a love nest with company funds. Although everyone in the office had gotten premiums for the past 2 years, for some reason, Bonnie had them much higher than usual each year. Rich managed to get big bonuses too. No one ever figured out why. When all this got out, he and Bonnie were fired. No big deal. The company didn't want any publicity. None of the videos ever made it to the internet. Susan and I couldn't have cared less, and we joked over beers that it would have been fun to make them stars, but the kids didn't want to publicly embarrass themselves. We understood their point of view. Bonnie and Rich now live in New Orleans, working for a small shipping company. Since leaving town, they hardly ever visit the kids, and they rarely even call. Last I heard, they are having a very difficult time paying child support and alimony. I wish them well. Well, maybe not.
I recently learned I will be inheriting some properties and a significant amount of money. I told my wife, but clarified that this is only between us, and she's not to tell anyone, especially her big-mouthed sister. I don't want anyone to know about the inheritance. I want to invest almost all of the money, hire a property management company, and keep our current lifestyle. Last night at dinner with her parents and siblings, her father congratulated me on my impending windfall, and my brother-in-law pulled me aside to ask about the houses I'd be receiving. He and his wife, my wife's big-mouthed sister, have been saving for a house, but haven't saved enough yet, and their credit scores are low. I was very angry with my wife all night, but I kept it in check. On the drive home, I yelled at her. I admit it wasn't my finest hour, but she did exactly what I told her not to do. She argued that my secrecy demand was not right, and that she had the right and duty to tell her family about our financial situation, because it was also her financial situation. We argued for hours, so when I finally had enough, I told her she couldn't be trusted to keep our secrets, and that I wasn't telling her anything else about the inheritance from that minute on. I said that in the heat of the moment, but the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. She tells her sister everything, and whatever her sister knows, everyone knows. I don't want the entire city to know what's happening with our bank account. We're due to meet our attorney, and later, a financial advisor next week. But I think I'll change that appointment to just me. To be clear, she's free to discuss anything with her family. I've only had 2 topics she's not allowed to discuss: my health and our finances. Not the idiot. Does your wife think she has a duty to inform her family about your inheritance, lottery win, or increase in salary? Does she also think she must share your windfall, especially with her sister and husband, who would like to have one of the houses you inherited? Of course she does. I don't need a crystal ball to see where this is going. This It sounds like she's already spending the money in her head. If you're in the U.S., an inheritance kept entirely in your name only is your sole property, not marital assets. You should consult a good attorney, probably a divorce attorney, to determine how best to ensure that these assets remain solely yours. You could then use income from the inheritance assets to improve and benefit your and your wife's lives without allowing her or her family to have any rights to your inheritance. She's going to do it anyway. She'll give OP's money to her family, one way or another. The dynamics of the family relationship have changed forever. Every holiday, they'll expect a more expensive gift. You'll be expected to pay for group dinners and expected to pay for group events and probably host. Also, why can't you take everyone to Jamaica for Christmas? Their kids aren't doing their best in public school, so can't you just help a child go private? Sister-in-law needs an emergency life-saving boob job and a tummy tuck. Can you help? And on and on. After all, you can afford it. Not gonna lie, I would probably walk. A sudden windfall changes family and relationship dynamics. People develop unhinged expectations that you must help them out no matter what. You set a clear, reasonable boundary for your family's financial future. Her decision to tell people has potentially put that at risk. At the very least, it'll strain your relationship with her family since they're already gearing up to ask for handouts. Your brother-in-law proved why you should never talk about money outside your immediate household. Never. I would have this money in a separate account because your wife and her family sound messy and entitled. My wife recently gave birth to my first child, but it's her fourth. With her first pregnancy, her family was very critical of the baby name she liked, so she just started giving her children ridiculous fake names, defending them furiously, and then to everyone's relief, changing her mind at the last minute and naming them something more normal. I thought this was hilarious, and thus we named our baby girl Grenadine. The joke fell flat though. My parents were too polite to say anything, and my wife's family had already caught on and took no notice. Regardless, we kept using the name as an inside joke because it had grown on us. Not long after we revealed the baby's sex and name, my brother revealed that they were male to female and would be transitioning soon. This wasn't massively surprising to anyone, so she didn't really get much of a reaction beyond a polite good for you from all of us, to be honest. Skip forward to now. My wife is out of the hospital and we've brought Susan home, a fake name for privacy, but I think something similar, and my family came to visit that week. My parents were visibly relieved and gushed over the new baby and her new name. My sister, on the other hand, pulled me aside and asked why we changed it. I explained the joke and that it was never a sincere choice, and she got very agitated. Apparently, she had adopted the name Grenadine for herself. I asked why she would even do that, and she told us she felt connected to the name when she heard us say it. I told her I didn't understand the issue. She hadn't legally changed it, and she hadn't even introduced herself as such to us yet either. She said that she had started using the name with her friends and in her daily life outside the family, and now it felt as if we were laughing about it behind her back the entire time. I went to rejoin the rest of my family because I was baffled at this point and thought my sister could pout for a while, but she'd get over it. She hasn't yet and is refusing to speak to me or acknowledge the baby when I bring her over. My sister still lives with our parents. Am I the idiot? Not the idiot. I think your sister needs to talk to a therapist about boundaries, identity, and self-esteem. It's just so weird that she'd choose her newborn niece's name as her new name, as if it wouldn't have caused a bunch of drama on its own. It's almost like the sister was planning on creating drama and is disappointed that their ploy didn't work, so now they're falling back on being upset about something else. I'd bet $5 she was planning on telling people that the baby was named after her or in her honor, and now she's angry she can't force that narrative. You are entitled to having inside jokes. You have a right to name your own child. You cannot know what your sister tells her friends when you're not present. OP, it sounds like your sister has main character syndrome. It's not about your baby's name, as you already know. It's about the fact that you denied her the opportunity to grandstand. She wanted you to argue with her about the name Grenadine and her use of it. Somewhere along the line, you'd be accused of not accepting her. You'd be forever cast as the villain. Now, by not arguing about the name, you've robbed her of the chance to play the victim. She's fuming. I, 42 female, have a son called Adrian, teen. Adrian is bi and has been out for 2 years. He has a twin sister, Anna. If I were to impose twin stereotypes on them, Adrian is the quiet one, and Anna's the one you should be afraid of. Adrian has an ex-best friend named Mike. They were friends when Adrian was 4 years old, and our families are quite close. Adrian told me that they fell out, but when Adrian first came out, Mike was his biggest supporter, and they only fell out a few months ago. Anna tells me that there's more to the story, but I won't pry. Since they stopped being friends, Mike tries very hard to engage in locker room or playground bullying against Adrian, but no one participates because Adrian is likable and chill. He's also nearly the same height as his father, 6'2", and quite big, so he's definitely not the type to get bullied, and he just doesn't care. He mostly ignores him and finds it quite funny. He's just very quiet and has been his whole life. Last week, after gym class, my son realized he had forgotten his shower gel at home and asked Anna for hers. She dropped it off and went back to her class. Her shower gel is bright pink, and my son has no issue using it. Mike, however, saw my son with this pink bottle and started on his usual, "Oh, look at how gay Adrian is," nonsense. Apparently, Mike was standing near Adrian's stuff, and my son responded with, "Your mom's gay. Now get away from my stuff." A few people laughed, and Mike then said, "Is the gel yours, or did you borrow it from your nasty sister?" Witnesses confirm all of this. He has been trying to get into a fight with my son for weeks now, and my son laughs at every attempt, but insulting Anna is one thing he won't tolerate. My son called Mike a slur, grabbed his things, and got into the shower. His exact words were, "Stop talking about my sister when I find your butt on Grindr." I was pretty shocked to hear this, because this is entirely out of character for Adrian, but even the most likable people have their limits. Mike is also straight. The situation escalated and has been brought to the attention of the school, which demanded that Adrian apologize for being phobic. During the meeting, I told them that the school is well aware that my son is bi, and therefore can't be phobic, especially to someone straight. I said I'd have him apologize for insulting Mike if Mike apologized for his behavior for the past few months, but they aren't budging. They are saying that my son's use of a slur was unacceptable and that he needs to apologize. But I don't think that it's a big deal considering the context. Mike's parents are also insisting that my son apologizes. Am I the idiot? Has Mike been told to apologize to Anna for calling her names and saying derogatory things behind her back in a public setting? Has he been ordered to apologize for the constant harassment and phobic comments to Adrian? How's your son being asked to apologize, but not the bully who did the same thing? He's been harassing your son for months. If anything, I'd be threatening the school with legal action for their neglect of this entire situation. Not the idiot in the slightest. Adrian can apologize if and only if Mike is made to apologize and atone for his behavior first. End of discussion. Not up for debate. The school seems to be run by path of least resistance type people. They'd rather punish the victims who defended themselves than deal with the hassle of correcting a bully, since bullies and their parents are almost always raging idiots who make their issues and insecurities everyone else's problem. The answer to that conundrum is simple. Make yourself the bigger problem so they'll switch targets. You are the idiot. What is this bull that just because you're bi or because your target is straight, you can't be phobic? That's utterly ridiculous. Your son, according to your detailed description, was being extremely phobic. You excuse his behavior and pretend that he automatically gets a pass on bigotry is extremely bad parenting. Mike's bad behavior doesn't magically excuse your son, and it's hypocritical for you to clutch pearls over Mike's behavior while cheering on your sons. OP, based on the information we have, I feel like there is a lot more to this story, and you have no idea what's happening. I'm guessing the more to the story is Mike is also questioning his orientation. It's a good chance he came on to Adrian, but Adrian turned him down because he was his best friend and didn't see him that way. Now Mike is hurt and embarrassed and expresses this by being a bully to Adrian. I, a teen female, am an only child. There has been no secret that my mom and dad hate each other. I don't think a week has gone by without them having screaming matches and someone driving off in their car. You get the gist of it. This has been kind of hurtful to me. They've never done anything to me, but they've always dumped their feelings about each other on me. I've always heard everything. And yeah, no kid wants that. They've been talking about getting a divorce in almost every argument since I can remember, and I think that's one of their most used words ever. I always hoped they would divorce. I love my parents, I do, but they also deserve a partner who loves them. So last night, while we were having dinner, they told me some bad news and told me to please not get upset, that they've tried everything and so on. Then they broke the news that they were going to divorce each other. I just said, "Oh, okay," and continued eating. They both started to cry and told me that I was insensitive, that I must have no feelings, because who doesn't react to their parents' divorce, and more stuff. They've been mad at me since because of my reaction, and when I talked to my friend, she told me that it was really bad of me to react like that, even though I was happy about the news. Maybe I was an idiot for not reacting more, but I mean, I can't force tears or something for news I've been waiting my whole life to hear. Not the idiot. Your reaction is normal. You don't have to pretend sadness for their sake. It seems that you've already learned that just because you reach adulthood, it doesn't mean that you reach maturity. And unfortunately, it seems like you're saddled with two emotionally immature parents. Just know their reaction is more about them and their inability to properly process their emotions. Nothing is going on here besides you having drama parents. OP's parents are probably reacting this way, in part because they always figured their marriage was miserable, but at least that sacrifice was for something. The revelation that remaining married was worse for themselves and their kid, and they just made everyone miserable for no reason, understandably stings. I think they'll probably have to process that before they can become amicably divorced co-parents. Darling, hopefully you will be okay, and they will be much happier parents for you now that they're going their separate ways. I'm 30 female, close to my sister, 32, and I've hated how bad her marriage has become. My sister got married 4 years ago. Her husband was a widower with 3 young children, pre-tween, young tween, and older tween when they got married. At first, I really liked my sister's husband, and they made a very good couple. She confided in me a couple of years ago that things weren't as great as they appeared to be on the outside. The kids would say awful things to her and her husband's family, and his late wife's family would make her feel like the mistress instead of his wife. We discussed this a lot, and I encouraged her to speak to her husband and a therapist and look for help. She brushed off the suggestions and stated she didn't want to rock the boat too much. We started hanging out a lot more, and I did my best to observe everything happening. Over time, it became super clear that the issues ran deeper than she even realized. Yes, the kids would say awful things to her about not being good enough, make fun of how she talks, she has a stutter, and compare her to their mom in a negative light. Yes, her husband's family treated her like she was his mistress, and they had no respect or care for her at all. Her husband's in-laws were very clearly bitter. She was in their grandkids' lives instead of their daughter, and they acted like it was her fault their daughter was gone. But her husband was always in hearing distance and would laugh. He would make his comments about how annoying she could be. He didn't compare her to his late wife or bring up his late wife when he was speaking badly about my sister, but he was doing his own crap. In April of last year, my sister finally started seeing a therapist. She's now almost at the stage where she thinks she'll leave soon. She still freezes when she thinks about it, but even her therapist thinks she's coming along amazingly. She has her exit plan and money ready to help her when she's out. My sister told me I no longer have to hold back if her husband annoys me. Saturday, my sister's husband shows up. I was having a small family dinner, and he showed up a few hours after my sister got here and tried to get himself into my house. I refused to let him in, and he told me it was a family dinner, and he and the kids should be there. But since they were with their aunt that day, he was there. I told him he wasn't welcome. I informed him I wouldn't allow someone into my home who treats my sister so disrespectfully and who allows his family, including his children, to be so cruel to my sister. He tried to make a fuss and complain that I brought up his kids. I told him that I put the kids' attitude on him 100% because they've been made to feel it's okay by him, never correcting them. He tried to yell his way in, but I stood firm. Afterward, my mom said I should have never interfered, and it's not our place to deny him entry when they're still technically together. Am I the idiot? Edit. Sister already gave me the go-ahead and had no issues with what I did, but our mom did. Even though my sister was okay with it, I could see where my mom was coming from, and it's what made me ask. Not the idiot. Your mom is wrong, saying it's not your place to deny him entry. It's your house, and he showed up uninvited, LMAO. It's entirely your place to decide who comes into your own home. Good for you helping your sis grow her shiny spine. I hope she ruins him in the divorce. So your sister's saying, don't let him in, and your mother's defending him and saying you should ignore your sister and let him in? What the heck is wrong with your mother? Oh, I think we all know that. She believes you never, ever get divorced because you made the till death do us part vows. Clearly, you're an amazing sister. Your home, your rules.